Good evening. Welcome to the February 23rd meeting of the Livermore City Council. I now call the meeting to order. Pardon me? February 13th? I thought I said 13th. Well, we'll check the film later. Okay, February 13th, day before Valentine's Day. So let the roll call show that all the members of the council are present and accounted for. I ask that you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, question for the city attorney. Was there any reportable action taken in the closed session?
No, Mr. Mayor, there was no reportable action in closed session this evening.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I have a proclamation tonight. This is a proclamation to the Livermore Joint Unified School District proclaiming Science and Engineering Month. I believe that Dr. Kelly Bowers is in the room. Very good. So with that, whereas during Science and Engineering Month, we recognize Livermore's exemplary science and engineering programs, and increase awareness of these programs among residents, and encourage additional programs focused on science and engineering. And whereas the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District provides science and engineering education to over 13,300 students in grades TK through 12. And whereas the Livermore Public Library hosts hands-on science and engineering programs such as the Create Lab, and checks out materials to promote science and engineering learning, including microscopes, telescopes, and programmable robots. And whereas scientists, engineers, and others reflect on the characteristics that make our city great: vision, creativity, responsibility, innovation, dedication, and hard work. And whereas the City of Livermore and Livermore Joint Unified School District have partnered to promote many science and engineering programs, activities, and events in Livermore, including Science on Saturdays, which is going on this month, Expanding Your Horizons, and Science Odyssey, among many others. And whereas Science and Engineering Month is a time to celebrate our successes and to thank Livermore's science and engineering education community for their contributions and commitment to our work, our youth, our community, and our economy. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of Livermore proclaims February 2017 as Science and Engineering Month here in Livermore and encourages residents to learn more about and participate in the science and engineering programs available in our community. And with that, I'd like to present this to you.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor and honorable City Council members. We are so pleased to receive this proclamation in support of our board's resolution. And it truly is an honor and a privilege to work in a city where we have such incredible labs and scientists and partners. And I invite you all personally to come this Thursday night to Science Odyssey to see over 600 students with their independent inquiry work and research. They'll share it with you with pride, and they will demonstrate all that they have learned, many of them under the tutelage of retired scientists in town. So thank you again. It's such an honor to be here.
Okay, moving on to the Citizens Forum. These are items that are not on the agenda. The Council can neither deliberate nor take action on any items that are brought up on the Citizens Forum. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. I have John Stein, Nancy Bankhead, and Bruce Shore. Mr. Stein.
John Stein, 1334 Cathy Court. Last fall, I suggested that the city begin planting trees during the winter. I mean, we all know the benefits of trees. They keep things cool in the winter, in the summer. They provide increased property values, shade, generally add to the ambiance of the community. Over the past few years, with the drought and now the wet weather, the city has lost a substantial number of trees. And I would urge that you begin planting them, replanting them as soon as possible. In the longer term, I think for new projects at high densities, the project should be required to provide irrigation to the street trees, larger tree wells, or perhaps even a 3 or 4 foot wide planting strip along the street. The one of the problems is with small tree wells, the tree outgrows the tree well, and also there's not enough rainfall captured to provide a moisture reserve for the summer. So I would urge that we look at that, as well as looking at appropriate trees for the climate. Obviously, we don't want coastal redwoods. We also probably, in the long term, can't depend upon oaks. I've noticed on the southeastern side of the community, the blue oaks and the valley oaks are starting to die off, perhaps from sudden oak death. So I would urge that you begin planting trees as soon as the rain eases up a little bit. The sooner they're planted, the better the chances of them thriving and surviving. Every year I've reminded you about the Arroyo Mocho. It really hasn't been cleaned out since the early 80s with Dan Lee as Public Works Director, and there are now full-grown trees in the channel. This has been a wet winter, but not a really unusually wet winter for this area. If we get a 25 or 50-year flood or rainfall, we could see parts of the city flooding because the channel is no longer adequate for carrying the rainfall. So I would urge, when you set priorities, you give a high priority to maintenance of the channel between Concannon and Stanley Boulevard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Nancy Bankhead, Bruce Shore, David McGuigan.
Hi, I have three things to bring to in front of you tonight. The first one is, I'm hoping you guys know about it. We're there. Olivia Newton-John was at the Bankhead Sunday. It was a fabulous show. I don't know, growing up here in town, to think that somebody the star value of Olivia Newton-John in Livermore was not something I thought about in high school. It was get out of here. So for me to be able to say that Olivia Newton-John was in Livermore is just one of the best things ever. But driving home from there on Portola and North Livermore, there was a man carrying a bucket down the road, and I'm going, what's he doing? And he stops at the utility box, and he bends over to get in the bucket to get a sponge so he can clean off the graffiti off the utility box. I thought that was cool. Our citizens are helping out. But my real thing to be here is last Tuesday, picked up my nephew going out to the ranch to feed the animals. And on the side of the road was this metal thing. And I go, what is that? So I back up to it. And the nephew's giving me trouble, and he opens the door. Where is it? Well, I was parked where he couldn't see it. So we moved. Anyway, this car drives up really quick on the other side of me and goes, that's my trap. I'm a falconer, and I have the right to have that on the road. And I go, what? He goes, yeah. And I mean, literally, I was scared by this man. So he goes, you want to see my permit? And I go, no. And I drove home, called 911, got the best 911 officer. We were having trouble with the cell phone and stuff. She got sheriffs out there within an hour. She got Fish and Wildlife to call me. He goes, they have permission to put traps on the side of the road. They can't go on private property without permission, but they can put them on the side of the road. And he goes, in certain areas. I go, in North Livermore? And he goes, let me call you back. Called me back. They have the right to set them on the road. The sheriffs came out. They can't do anything. The man, the Fish and Wildlife knew who the man was because he gave him a permit. What do we do? I mean, I'm just one person. I need help finding out what to do to change this law. There are 5 kites out in our area. I don't own these kites. I don't know. They're hawks.
White-tailed kites.
Yeah, I mean, they flap like this, and they stand still in the sky, and then they dive down, and they get rats, and not rats, but mice and bows and rabbits and squirrels. They help the ranchers out there. They're wonderful things to watch and stuff. The ones, most of them out there are more than juvenile. He can only catch a juvenile animal, but who is controlling this? Where do I go to get help for this?
So he's catching raptors. He's catching small raptors, kites, and the like. Okay.
Red-tailed hawks. He's got 2 rats in there, a white rat and a black rat.
Let me work on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bruce Shore, Dave McGuigan, Lauren Haynes.
Members of our City Council, I wish to speak about something that will not be part of any City Council action, but which should concern every one of us here in this room. From the BBC today, I read that on Friday, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security confirmed that officers of the ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, had raided homes and workplaces in Atlanta and the Los Angeles area, and activists said that raids had been carried out in Virginia, North Carolina, New York, Kansas, and other parts of California. This branch of our federal government answers to our president. It is today the American counterpart of the terror-inspiring Gestapo of Nazi Germany, against which young men of my father's generation fought and died in a bloody European war starting December 7th, 1941. It creates terror in the souls of many people in this country. Let me tell you an example. Here in Livermore, a young restaurant Mexican worker, a very good worker, had been enrolled on a list to earn a green card and to be able to have the legal status that his wife now has. They're expecting a child. But no longer is it possible for him to proceed along that path. Our government has stopped that possibility, and now he lives in terror that some minor mishap, say a traffic violation, will bring him before our court system, where he will be noticed by and deported by our feared Gestapo. In the same way that the National Socialist regime of Germany identified a small ethnic minority, the Jews, as the center of a hostile international conspiracy that would bring disaster to their nation, so too has our own regime identified a small ethnic minority, the Muslims, as the center of a hostile international conspiracy that must be expunged at all costs to the freedoms and liberties that have been part of our nation from its birth. These and many other actions of our government are not good. We should none of us be pleased or complacent.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. David McGuigan, Lauren Haynes, Doug Mann.
You'll remember that the officer testified that the man was holding a cane. As you can see, the image of a cane actually does create a semblance of frailty and whatnot. The other thing the officer testified to was suddenly witnessing the pedestrian suddenly start running with his arms and legs pumping. So he testified to seeing this. Yes, that's very awkward. And two, I can't really see how the cane doesn't fill into that image of the guy running at some point. But the real problem was that there was no cane found at the scene. So you really have a problem. Either the officer was negligent because he failed to preserve the evidence at the scene, or he's negligent because he introduced testimony to seeing a cane that didn't exist and nobody else saw it, and I certainly didn't see it. So my question to you, Mayor, is which do you believe? Was he negligent for not preserving the scene, or was he negligent for making false testimony? Maybe mistakenly, but false testimony.
Please finish your comments.
It is very clear to me, and because I experienced it, and hard to express the disappointment, but when a police officer commits deliberate perjury against you by testifying that they didn't talk to you for the first 40 minutes, when they really had your signed statement in their hand at that point, it destroys your faith in the system. Your chief knows that this has occurred and has somehow managed to complete a thorough and detailed examination without even asking the officer what he was doing for that 40 minutes he's lying about. You've all stated that you believe that lying by the police is morally wrong and everybody deserves a fair trial. Your chief's actions are directly contrary to that. What are you going to do about it? That's my comments.
Thank you, Mr. McGuigan. Lauren Haynes, Doug Mann, Stacy Swanson.
Oh, and you got a error on your agenda here. You're not really going to be adjourning to a February 9th meeting, are you? That's probably the wrong date.
Thank you, Mr. McGuigan, for bringing that to our attention. Lauren Haynes, Doug Mann, Stacy Swanson.
Hi. My name is Lauren Haynes. I live in town, and I'm here to talk a little bit about to support the proposed Arts Career Center. I heard about the Arts Career Center about a month ago from an article in the newspaper and tracked down Chuck Eiler, who's over here, and emailed him to get more information to see how I could help. As a person who grew up in Livermore and attended Portola, Junction Avenue, and Livermore High School, I am elated about the prospect of an arts center with a focus on real-world training and career preparation. I am a set designer and prop stylist for film, stills, and advertising by trade, and got my experience in New York, where I lived and worked for 10 years. My husband and I also own a restaurant and craft cocktail bar in Greenpoint, a neighborhood in Brooklyn. We moved back to Livermore 2 years ago, and together with partners from San Francisco, we are opening our second restaurant with an attached market in the old Charlotte's Web building, which is 1 block from the proposed Arts Career Center. The restaurant will be called Range Life. It will be a farm-to-table restaurant celebrating the slow food movement. We will feature local and seasonal menus, and with our chef coming from Tartine in San Francisco, we will be sure to have great bread and provisions. We were already planning to offer culinary and cocktail classes to the community in our space, so when I read about the culinary aspect of the Arts Career Center, I wanted to help and see if we could partner our vision with that of the ACC. As veterans of the food service industry in both New York and San Francisco, we have an extensive list of chefs, sommeliers, restaurant managers that we can entice to help teach both high school and adult classes. Another exciting aspect of the proposed plan for me is the rooftop terrace and garden. Using an edible landscaping plan, the greenery on the rooftop can double as a teaching tool for the culinary arts. In New York, I worked with farm-based education programs and have seen the tremendous good that comes out of kids growing and cooking their own food. I think we have a unique opportunity to be able to build that infrastructure into the plan of the Arts Career Center and have the entire cycle of farm to fork just an elevator ride away. So I have a twofold interest in the Arts Career Center, first as a film and advertising industry professional, and second as a restaurant owner. As a kid growing up in Livermore in the 80s and 90s, I patched together my art education through classes in Hayward, Pleasanton, and Concord, and tried to make fantasy books and games my Arts Career Center. I can't imagine how helpful and inspiring it would have been to have one place that I could go to find out what path my career could take, and to have access to a hub of resources and creative individuals all working in close proximity to one another. Next week, I'll be accompanying some of the proponents of the Arts Career Center on a tour of a promising, underutilized building in the area that could be transformed into a scene shop for the center. I'm happy to be a part of this growing team of Livermore residents who want to realize the potential of the Arts Center with as much knowledge and experience as we can gather. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. Perfect timing. Doug Mann, Stacy Swanson, Jason Bezos.
Good evening, Council. Here to talk about the Lucky Center and just some comments relating to the last meeting that we had. There seemed to be a great deal of bewilderment by the Council about sort of how it was that we got here and why the public was making the comments that it did. In particular, Councilmember Warner, or otherwise known as Bob the First, and how, he was disappointed that the process really had led to dividing the community, and that whole, that's depressing, and I agree. It's sad that it, instead of, becoming a beautiful thing and sort of a coming together of the community, instead we're spread apart, much like the national politics, and that is sad. But let's see if we can get perspective here, and I think I have some idea about what I feel has happened with this process, which has been many years in the making. I heard comments from the council, things like, when we were doing Livermore Village, people wanted hundreds of homes, that the downtown specific plans had hundreds of homes, and that was debated and all of that kind of language. But I just want to point out that that was all done during a time when a private party owned all of that land. And what the public will tell you about what they want to see when given an option, like that is different when conditions change. And the option was, hey, there's somebody who owns this land, he's going to build houses. What kind of houses do you want to see? That's a very different question from, hey, we own the land, there's no rush, it costs us nothing to hold it and take as much time as we want. Now what would you like? That's a very different question, and that's the question that just wasn't asked. And I understand why it wasn't asked. This had always been a development process. Staff, thinks about it as, okay, as a development process, and we developed the wrong RFP, and this is 20/20 hindsight. But with that 20/20 hindsight, we developed the wrong RFP, and that's what happened. And I think the whole reset that we have going on here is a good thing, and I think that it's going to, the whole process is going to get better. What's clear, what seems clear is that people want a hotel, they want parking, but everything else should be on the table. Where the hotel goes could be anywhere. It doesn't even have to be necessarily on the parcels that we own. It may go somewhere else. And I'll just take 10 more seconds here. I have more to say, but maybe I'll have to come back next week. We've got to talk about how the workshops are put together. It was bad, and we need a complete redo on how that's going to go. And I encourage the use of volunteers rather than paying the people that did it last time. But we'll talk more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Stacy Swanson, Jason Bezos, Connie Copps.
Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. As part of STEM Month, we're very happy to let you know that out in Springtown, we're going to be participating in the Bio Blitz, which will be Saturday the 18th from 10 to 2. We'll be out there helping citizen scientists catalog all the critters that are out in our new open space, plants, animals. There's actually an app you can upload to your phone, and experts will help you identify what it is you're looking at. So I hope everybody will come out from 10 to 2 on Saturday the 18th for the Bio Blitz. Thanks.
Tell them not to pick the Livermore tar plant.
No picking anything.
Thank you. And that's the Springtown Bio Blitz, February 18th. Okay, very good. Thank you. Jason Bezos, Connie Copps. Mr. Bezos.
Hey, good evening. I'd like to echo what Doug Mann just said moments ago about the Catalyst site and the reset. We thought we had a reset, but really what's happened at the last meeting, and that's why I'm here tonight, is ask for a reconsideration on moving the historic train depot. That very same plan that he was referring to, 2006, that was used as a justification. The city claimed that back in 2006, that development, that was when the city approved the depot moving. And we had Mark Roberts, who's now the city manager, back there saying, well, we're moving the depot to put it into public hands. Well, the very next year, the depot building was purchased by the city, and so we've had 10 years of public ownership. And last council meeting, I think what bothers me is the two major factions of the city, and I thought this was very apt you said, Councilman Warner, is that is the two factions, they were both in complete agreement, get that depot out of there. And I think that should say something to you, too. They have two competing agendas for how to redevelop. They want a blank slate. Both of these major factions want a blank slate, and they want the depot out of there. But the downtown specific plan, as I said at the last meeting, I can't find, and it's protected from relocation. It's a National Historic Resource. That's the default assumption. But yet, and the only time it can be moved is only if it's found to be necessary under very special circumstances of some public benefit of relocating it. And there's nothing in the record there that says what the very special circumstances are, what the public benefit is, why it's necessary. And I think it's deliberate in part because that's the other reason I'm asking a reconsideration. I think there was too much discussion there, not focusing on the fact this is a 35% cost overrun. One of your first votes as a council member was to rubber stamp the 2006 plan and to give, to add, it was going to be a $3 million to move the depot. The last meeting it jumped up to $4.1 million. And that $1 million, there's no time limit on spending. It could be spent for any project in downtown Livermore within the redevelopment area. And it could have even been used to restore the depot right on its site. You know, the strings are not attached to that. So what I want to really emphasize, and this is my big point, the $250,000 of low-income housing funds out of Fund 611, I really think that you need to in this meeting, you've either misappropriated funds to low-income housing funds to move and renovate a train station. It just doesn't make sense. And I have here citing from the Livermore Municipal Code, the section which says the fees and interest earned will be used only to finance programs to create more affordable housing. How does moving a train station create more affordable housing unless the hidden agenda is to put affordable housing precisely on the site of that depot? And there have been train stations on that very site since the city was founded in 1869. So, I mean, through the back door, we're seeing maybe the council's already pre-committed to putting affordable housing on that site. You've either misappropriated $250,000 of low-income housing funds, or you need to have some explanation. And there's just I can't find findings in the record, and I think principle has been thrown out the window, and we've seen sheer politics have taken over. And by the way, in 2006, you also approved the downtown green from K Street 2 blocks to Livermore Avenue. What happened to downtown green? You guys rush on moving the depot, but you don't move forward on the green, so it's selective there. But again, I ask you to reconsider, to justify also, especially that $250,000 of low-income housing funds, why it's being spent to move the train station, if there are any strings put on it, saying that it can be used to move but can't be used to renovate. So that's reassure people there's not misappropriation of funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bezos. Mr. Spence, quick question. Just sit down. You can have a seat. Or you can hand that off to Mr. Spence or Ms. Neer. Thank you. The $250,000, as I recall, the site was purchased using a lot of redevelopment funds, which included affordable housing funds. And I believe that $250,000 was to pay back the funds that we used to acquire the property, or there was some balance in that regard.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
He'd probably explain it better than I just did.
No, you're right. The funds were utilized for the purchase of the property, and we do have other affordable housing funds that were also utilized for the purchase of that property. And as we've discussed, for that site as a whole, that's one of the things we'll have to think about is how that fund may be paid back over time for those funds, depending on how it's developed.
Okay, so but that's not misappropriation, it's just paying back that fund.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mayor.
Mr.
I'm
Bezos,
sorry.
please.
But it's another $250,000 going out the door for this project.
That's the money we were talking about. Ms. Copps?
So I received some documentation in an email that I asked for at a previous meeting about the ownership of the land that you own for the Springtown facilities. And some of the actual documentation that I received contradicts other documentation that was presented at meetings prior to the parks taking on the role of becoming the lead agency to give some, I guess, designs for the park. I don't know if that's a done deal, whatever, you know, I've been going to the meetings. However, like from the get-go, I had asked so many times for an audit and to get on the same page. I'm dealing with some trouble with my HOA. I've been intimidated, and I'm kept at an arm's length, and all I've ever asked for is the facts. I think they're important as we move forward. Now, according to like the meetings that we had in the beginning, it was always at the city, Darren was always saying, and some of the city people, that the city had taken over the golf course in 1971. Now, according to minutes from your own meetings, that never occurred till 1973. There were 2 documents that I did receive at a public request many years ago that were just written in legalese terms, so not legalese, survey terms. So it's really impossible for a layman to know where the boundaries of your ownership in Springtown are. Additionally, there is another parcel that backs up to the parcels that you sent me, which is parcel number 992411-5, and that was 1966 Bluebell Drive. When I called the county, and this is what I was told verbally, so I haven't gone out to the county to search the microfiche or anything, but that parcel is recorded to be around 85 acres in and of itself. So all the news articles that I can dig up from back then say that the city was purchasing 85 acres. One said 36, one said 1, but it was one purchase. However, 2 deeds came at us, and this parcel I just mentioned has never been offered in that. Now, according to what I see on the parcel viewer from the county, there's also rental units on that land. And these rental units, I guess the city made another entity, and they kind of rented to themselves under like a different name, but there was like $30 million deposited in that. So my bottom line is, and if you can let me finish here, I've had kind of a stressful day. I would really like Springtown looked at as a whole. What does the city own? What are their future plans for it? Because this open space initiative, we need to know what's going to go around it, and we need to know what's legal, and I need to be able to speak to the people that run the board of my directors, because I really don't want that land that we own, the almost 6 acres that we own, I don't want that to blight. So I really need to know what's going on, and I really appreciate your homework on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Copps. Okay, with that, that's the last of the cards that I have for the Citizens Forum. With that, we move on to the consent calendar. These are items that are typically of a routine nature, and it's usually passed with a single motion. With that, does anybody wish to pull any of the consent calendar for consideration? Do I have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Moved by Vice Mayor, seconded by... But that's easy. Yeah. By Councilmember Warner. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 5.01. The execution of a sales tax agreement with Gillig LLC. Mr. Kiefer.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Stephen Kiefer. I'm the city's Director of Innovation and Economic Development. Before you tonight is a proposed resolution authorizing the execution of a sales tax reimbursement agreement between the city and Gillig LLC. Gillig is one of the country's leading bus manufacturers with more than 850 employees. The company is in the process of moving from Hayward into a new 650,000 square foot facility here in Livermore. The new facility requires Gillig to make significant public infrastructure improvements. In order to defray a portion of the cost of these improvements, Gillig is requesting assistance through the city's established sales tax reimbursement program. The program directs a fraction of the sales tax generated by the business and collected by the city to be reimbursed back to the business on an annual basis after the business has generated an established minimum sales tax threshold. In accordance with the city's program, the term of the agreement is 15 years. Over the term of the agreement, the overall maximum reimbursable amount is no more than the eligible cost of the infrastructure improvements and related impact fees, which in this case is approximately $5 million. The reimbursement is only triggered when the business generates a significant annual amount of sales tax to the city, and in this case, that amount is more than $1 million annually. Based on its current and projected taxable sales volume, Gillig qualifies for participation under the city's established program. The program was offered to Gillig in 2013 and was factored into its decision to move to Livermore. The new Gillig facility is expected to generate well over $1 million in net annual sales tax revenue to the city. Additionally, the project includes over $60 million in property improvements, resulting in additional annual property tax generation to the city. Finally, the facility and its employees will utilize established businesses within the city, such as facility maintenance, restaurants, hotels, and other related services, thereby serving as a significant jobs and tax base multiplier. And that concludes my presentation, and now I'd like to introduce Derek Monis, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Gillig. He has a few additional comments.
Thanks, Stephen. Good evening. First, just want to say thank you to Stephen Kiefer and the team for, working with us over the years to make this a reality. Gillig has been in Hayward, California for 60 years building buses. 60 years. We've been a Bay Area manufacturer since 1890, but Hayward for the last 60 years building buses. It's been a very big decision for this company to move forward and make a decision to relocate our entire business and our 850 and growing employees. But we came to Livermore because this is a place that we want the future of Gillig to be. This is a area where we see a city that is looking to bring additional jobs. We look at a city here that has a great quality of life for our employees. And the most important thing to Gillig is our employees. You can imagine that when I approached my board of directors, after 60 years of being in Hayward, that it's time to build a new facility and invest the kind of capital that we're going to invest, and to do it not only back in the state of California, but to keep this business in the Bay Area. I asked my board to consider allowing us to move this company to this great company with a long storied history to Livermore, California. And the response I got was a lot of questions. Why are you guys moving? Why would you recommend to the board to move and even stay in California when every other company is considering going to the low-cost manufacturing of everywhere else today? And not only that, you want to move to Livermore, California. We did a little bit of due diligence, and you want to put your plant not too far away from wine country? And the answer is quite simple. We have 850 plus employees that are the reason why Gillig has been so successful over the years. I can't wrap my head around rewarding the success of hardworking individuals over the years by moving their jobs to a different state. I can't wrap my head around that. But what I can do is wrap my head around rewarding them by moving them to a great community like Livermore. In fact, so we were talking about this over 3 years ago, and there's a lot of decision making that we had to do. There's a lot of decision making that you had to do. But when we had the ability to move forward with the board and get the approval and start construction, the migration started happening, and it was really interesting to see. We have a lot of employees, a few of them here with me tonight, that picked up and moved, and they moved to Livermore. This is a great community. This is a community for the future of Gillig, and we are incredibly, incredibly proud to be having the opportunity to move here. And I don't know if you guys have had a chance to drive around the new plant, but I'm so incredibly proud of what we're building over there. You know, we build transit buses that provide mobility to people that don't have mobility. We provide transit buses that take congestion off the road. In Walnut Creek right now, our first 4 pilot transit buses that are zero tailpipe emission, battery electric buses are running around the downtown circular. Our plant here in Livermore are going to be building the next 4 and the future zero emission buses. This is a great company with a great history, with incredible employees, and we are just excited to be coming to a great town like the city of Livermore. Thanks for your time.
Well, Derek, I think the first time we met and talked was 3 years ago.
Right.
And there were a lot of questions. Again, it was a real battle with the board about how do you justify this. But I assure you that Gillig made the right decision. This is a great community, cutting-edge technology, and Gillig are the best buses in the world. So it's a great fit. So welcome to Livermore. You're going to start populating the plant, I believe, in March and actually be in production by May?
That's exactly right, yeah. So the move is we start production on May 10th. And at that point, Livermore will have roughly 50% of the transit buses that are built in the United States or sold into the United States will be built here in Livermore, California.
That's great. Excellent. Invite us for the ribbon cutting.
Absolutely.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, about 18, 19 years ago, I was a transit planner with Wheels, and we purchased a group of buses from Gillig, and I had the pleasure of spending 2 weeks on site inspecting those buses. And I have to say, from the executive team to the line workers, everybody that I worked with, they were just great. They were gracious. I was a brand new transit planner with a lot of stupid questions, and I never felt like I was treated poorly. When I heard that Gillig was moving to Livermore, I was very excited because I knew not only the product that you put out, but the company that you are. And I am very, very grateful that you kept it local and extremely local and chose Livermore. So thank you.
Well, and I used to work just down the street from Gillig when I was working for the city of Hayward. Worked just down the street, and I've toured the plant before. It's an amazing plant, and now you're here in Livermore. So we're still back in the same city. So I'm very proud to have you here. Councilmember Warner?
Oh, I think this is just truly wonderful that you decided to come here, and I'm just very pleased. And you know, we're such a euphoria here. We just want to make sure we don't up the amount we're going to give them back. But I think this is absolutely the right thing to do, and it couldn't be better.
I feel rude sitting back there while you guys are talking to me. I apologize. There are, Stephen, you know that the transit authorities come in to inspect their buses. They come in to define their buses. They come in to inspect their buses. We have thousands of customers that are going to come in from all over the country, and they're coming to Livermore. They're going to be spending nights in the hotels. They're going to be spending money in the restaurants, but they're going to be coming, and they're going to be coming to Livermore, which is exciting.
We have more than just a seafood restaurant right by the airport to take people to, so I'll say that. And I do have to admit, a little part of me was a little disappointed because we looked at bids from Germany, and I'd have to spend a couple weeks in Germany, but I'm glad that we chose Hayward. It was right down the road.
American jobs.
Yep, American jobs.
And Measure BB, the transit initiative that's going to be the sales tax, every bus that's sold here in Alameda County goes to Measure BB and contributes to the continuing transit in the region.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Any comments?
Just quick, I understand that a little bit of your workforce may live over the hill to the east of us, too. And I see that as a big plus that we don't talk about so much, that here's a few more cars taken off the road 20 miles earlier from going through Castro Valley. There's workers living in Livermore without having to clog those roads or pile on the BART train or the ACE train or anywhere else first thing in the morning. I am so pleased to see you guys come into Livermore. I go by your facility about once a week just to watch it to proceed. It's fantastic.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, a lot of our employees are over the Altamont, and getting over the Altamont that half an hour earlier than they did before is making a significant improvement to their lives.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and just to remind everybody, you know, the hours that we keep, we start at 5 a.m. in the morning, and our shift ends at 1:30 in the afternoon. So there are 850 jobs coming to town, but they're coming in before everybody's awake, and they're leaving town before everybody is done with their work. So the impact on the traffic is very minimal.
Great.
I'd just like to congratulate Mr. Kiefer and his team for working so closely with you guys to put together such a wonderful set of circumstances for you and for our whole community. So.
And if I could just make one comment about that, it's this was a new experience for myself and my team, and having a team member here to navigate through this with was extremely helpful. This is not an uncomplicated process from the construction side, and then the overall process being new, Stephen and his team did a wonderful job and really came to us as a teammate and helped us out tremendously.
And there was a tremendous amount of regional collaboration. Multiple agencies came together because we saw the significance of this and how important it was for the region. So it was there's a great team here. Yep. Thank you. I do have 2 speaker cards, Don Argula and Dale Kay.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Marchand, council members. Dawn Argula, CEO for the Livermore Valley Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Chamber, I want to express thanks to the City of Livermore for its leadership in developing this program to provide incentives to attract business to the community. In place for many years, it's a creative way to ensure that the necessary infrastructure improvements are made to accommodate new economic growth while recognizing the significant financial investment of business in their new community. And we are excited about Gillig joining our community, and we welcome them, and we can't wait for them to be here. And I want to thank you for your diligence and your support of this important tool that ensures the economic vitality of this city. Thank you. And thank you to staff, and thank you to the City Council and the Mayor for your leadership.
Thank you. Dale Kay.
Thank you. Dale Kay with Innovation Tri-Valley Leadership Group. It looks like we may be preaching to the choir here, which is always lovely, but I do give you such commendation for initiating this sales tax reimbursement. I think it's one of the most innovative economic development initiatives that I've seen in this region and elsewhere. I remember sitting with you, Mayor, when we had a German company that was coming in that was very interested. So it's helping us with international companies, and it's helping us with companies like Gillig, who are so important. Those jobs, that's a lot of jobs, and I am just so impressed. Every time I drive behind a bus, I see Gillig, because you are everywhere. So obviously we support this move and welcome them into the community, and thank you for your innovation as well.
Thank you. With that, I have no more speaker cards. I'm going to close the public hearing. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. Close public hearing. Any discussion? Any questions at this point? Comments? Do I have a motion?
Sure, I'd like to. Oh. You have the microphone on? Oh, it's the microphone on, so he gets first. Go ahead.
I said also move.
And then I'll second.
Okay, as the chair of LAFTA, which is probably going to be buying some of these buses.
Actually, I believe Wheels has an order with Gillig, and we should be receiving them shortly after opening, from what I understand. So,
May 11th, huh?
Local business. Awesome. This is great.
Or we can switch the first and second.
Oh, it doesn't matter. That's fine.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Warner, seconded by Vice Mayor Spadowski. Any comment on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Any abstentions? It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you. Congratulations. Welcome to Livermore. Thank you. Okay, moving on to 5.02. This is the hearing to redesignate the general plan and zoning of the Sonoma Elementary School site from educational to residential. Frank Guido is the planner on this project.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening to you and to council members. So moving on to the presentation. This is the aerial view of the site. up is north here, and you see Sonoma Avenue along the top near the existing buildings. And El Caminito is a couple hundred feet, or about 100 and some feet to the west, to the left, and Wall Street is down to the south of the site. And in terms of background, this is an elementary school site. It was built in 1961, and an ownership by the school district, not in district use for approximately 30 years, and presently not in any use for approximately 3 years. And the school district went through a process they could talk about more later to declare the site a surplus site. And state regulations require them at this point to dispose of the property. There are no plans for the school district to reuse it as a school. There's a support letter in the packet, and again, as mentioned, the school district representative is here for answering any questions later on. So to do the project, general plan amendment is needed, and this slide shows the proposed change. On the left is community facility school, and the proposal is to go to the urban medium-high designation. It does have a slightly higher density than the surrounding land use density. The urban medium around it, lighter mustard color, has a 4.5 ohm per acre density, and the proposal is up to 6, which is 1.5 ohms per acre, a little bit more. The rezoning that goes with this is to take it from, on the left, from the education and institutions district over to, on the right, the low-density residential district, which matches the surroundings with the same setback, height, and lot coverage, and overall development standards. The RL district implements the proposed general plan proposal, and the copy of the RL district is in the packet. And here we go. So, again, sum up, changing from community facility school to residential. And overall, this implements some general plan policies for consolidating development to use existing infrastructure, which is typical of infill, and also helps preserve North Livermore open space. And speaking to that last point, the city does have a growth management program which limits the number of housing approvals that can occur year over year. And the growth management program has a part that requires sites that change to residential from non-residential to contribute to preserving North Livermore open space. And to that end, the project will be required to either obtain easements to North Livermore for that purpose or to contribute about $1.1 million to preserve North Livermore open space through easements. The 8 affordable housing homes in the project would be exempt from the payment of the fees. Oops. Okay, so where this is happening, it's within an overall neighborhood, as we saw in the aerial. Sunset Homes developed the surroundings with about 1,700 homes over time. The homes are your typical suburban single-family homes, side-by-side lots with front-facing garages and driveways. And the proposal is to do a similar layout of homes. This is the site layout. 54 homes, 9 are on Sonoma Avenue here, and 45 are in the internal to the Loop Street. And this slide shows a closer view of the side-by-side lot pattern with the front-facing garages and 2-car driveways, pattern that matches the neighborhood. As to parking, each home would have the two cars in the garage, 2 cars in the driveway, and additionally, there are 40 on-street parking spaces. So counting the private parking, the 4 per home, plus the 40 on the street, the project is providing 4.7 parking spaces per home. This slide shows one of the project features where it complies with the city design guidelines for providing a well-landscaped street with a street canopy and detached sidewalk. To do this, the street is slightly narrowed to 32 instead of 36 feet. There's parking on one side, which reduced street parking by only 8 spaces from 48 to 40. considered a good trade-off because this design has a substantial benefit of creating a well-shaded street with a good street tree canopy for pedestrian comfort. Okay, so this slide shows a close-up of the entry, the two designated landscape lots flanking the entry that are going to be HOA maintained. One goes along the street here, and one comes along the entry street, which helps maintain a nice entry. The street entry is also angled to avoid, so it's directed in alignment with the garages across the street to avoid impacting living space of the existing homes across the street. So this slide shows how the project would have to change some ground contours, and that's because the sewers in Sonoma Avenue up here, and so the slide has to be slightly lifted in the south end so that it flows to Sonoma Avenue. As a consequence, some of the new lots are on the west and south edges, as indicated by the red here, will be up to 3 feet higher than the existing lots. Range is 1 to 3 feet. And on the east end, on the homes back in the Sonoma Court, those lots, the new lots will be about up to 3 feet lower. To offset this, the project is proposing some slightly deeper lots by about 5 feet on the edges where the lots would be higher. So this slide illustrates the general distribution of the existing one-story versus two-story homes in the development that adjoins the site. And this is noted because the project is proposing all two-story homes. And there are some features of the project to offset having all two stories and somewhat higher lot elevations on the edges, and that is that one of them is that the RL district requires a minimum 100-foot setback, and the project is proposing slightly higher at about 100-foot deep lots, and they're proposing slightly deeper lots to help create a bigger buffer. Another basis for the Planning Commission recommendation, in addition to the slightly deeper lots, shown in the cross-sections provided in the report. The cross-sections show a slice through the backyards of the existing and the proposed homes. And this one is an example from the west edge, where the new lots are somewhat higher than existing. And the dashed line indicates where a new home or an addition could be built per the proposed RL standards. And for example, a single-story home could be built at 5 feet with the second story at 10. And the project is proposing overall setbacks that are generally around 20 feet, and to help offset, they're proposing all two-story buildings. And in this particular example, the result is an approximately combined 45-foot distance between the homes. This other one's, as an example, is on the other end, where the proposed lots are lower than the existing lots. The dashed line again indicates where a home could be built at 5 foot for the first floor, 10 feet for the second. And in this example, with a 24-foot setback, the result is an approximately 35-foot distance between the proposed and existing homes. Another basis for Planning Commission recommendation shown in this slide, and this feature arises because the project proposes to use existing standard zoning instead of proposing smaller setbacks. The proposed use of the RL district results in requiring a 5-foot and 7-foot side setback plus an additional 5-foot setback at the second story. And so the use of the standard zoning, the RL district, to match the surroundings results in space between the second stories of the new homes, and that allows for light and air versus having them go straight up, and it avoids a wall-like effect. And using the standard zoning therefore helps the project offset some of the massing issues. Another basis for the Planning Commission recommendation for project approval is architectural detailing, and illustrated in this slide. In the rear and second stories, the egress windows are put to the sides, and only high sill windows are out on the back to help protect privacy. So this is a feature, one of the features taken into account by the Planning Commission in addition to the deeper lots and deeper setbacks. In terms of public comment outlined in the report and in attachments, and in a supplemental information received by the council. There's various correspondence, both opposing and favoring the project. The most frequently cited concerns include school crowding, open space, massing of the homes, and traffic. And as mentioned previously, the school district representative is here to address the crowding and enrollment issues. And it should be noted that there are 5 local parks within three-quarter mile radius of this site, and the project will be paying about $800,000 in park fees to be used for capital park projects. The house massing was addressed in the presentation and just the previous slides. You know, for example, the deeper lots, deeper setbacks, the higher sill windows, and the use of standard zoning results in separation side to side. And a traffic analysis was conducted and did not identify any significant impacts to traffic or intersections from the project. Staff would just like to transition to and close with a summary of the proposed architectural design. The proposed design complies with the city's design standards and guidelines. There are 4 floor plans and 3 different looks, total of 12 looks, which is a good variety for 54 homes. And the following slide will illustrate the look. So this slide shows one of each of the floor plans, and all 3 styles are representative. For example, in the upper left is the Craftsman and the Plan 1 floor plan, and the upper right is the traditional in the Plan 2 floor plan. The lower right has the ranch in Plan 3 down here, and the lower left is the Plan 4 in the Craftsman. The project has, as mentioned, a relatively high level of architectural and floor plan variety for its size, with styles that are compatible with the neighborhood. And so this will close staff's presentation. The recommendation is as stated in the report. Staff's available for questions, and both the applicant, William Lyon Homes, and the property owner school district are available for providing information or answering any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from the council? Councilmember Green.
I wanted to address the school crowding. First of all, I had several questions, which will probably come over the next few minutes, but how school crowding will be addressed. Since Sonoma hasn't been used as a school for quite some time now, how will that neighborhood be accommodated?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Currently in that area, there are 4 schools, 2 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school. All of them have the capacity to handle students who would arrive at the schools over the next 10 years. We recently completed a demographic study. That demographic study indicates that school enrollment citywide will increase by between 700 and 1,000 over the next decade. As I mentioned, we have 2 elementaries in the neighborhood. Both of them are well under capacity. We have intentionally grown Joe Mitchell K-8 because it's got a new program. And so between those 2 schools, Emma Smith and Joe Mitchell, we have approximately 350 students attending from outside of the area. So right now, it is well underneath the neighborhood demands, and so we don't think that the closing of the school is going to have any impact on our capacity for student enrollments.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I knew we had some capacity in schools from my work with you when I was at LARPD. So,
yep.
Thank you for making that clear.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just a couple questions. So the school district has already designated it as surplus property.
Correct.
And the slide showed that there's a rule under the state that you must dispose of surplus property.
Correct.
What's the time frame, and what are the consequences if you don't dispose of surplus property? I think I know the answer, but it's usually when it involves the state, it involves the state taking something back.
So the state doesn't want us to be in the real estate business. The state wants us to be in the education business. So they typically give us about 2 years from a site being unoccupied for its intended purposes, in this case the intended purpose is an elementary school, to make some decisions. As long as we continue to use that for educational purposes, which we have over the years, we don't have to pay any fines. But the moment we quit using the site for educational purposes, then fines kick in. So they're in the upwards of hundreds of thousands per year.
Okay, and the other question I had for staff, what's the street width of Sonoma? That looks like it's well above 36. Is that 40?
That's typical would be about 36 to 40 for such a street.
40, because it looked a little bit bigger than a 36, but okay. Thank you.
I had a question for Mr. Van Schack. What will you do with the money? What will the school district do with the money that you get from the sale of the property?
So the sale of the property will be used for 2 purposes. One would be capital improvements, so building shade structures, for example, renovating locker rooms. Another portion of the money, about 35%, will be used for instructional materials. And so using those for purchase of computers, textbooks, other things that will benefit the students in the short term. We'll also use some of that money for improving technology infrastructure so that we can have greater capacity for wireless access on our school sites.
Is there a state law that limits how you can spend the money?
Yeah, there is actually a state law. We had to request a waiver. Typically, the state would like us to use the proceeds from the sale of property for capital improvements, and so we asked for the waiver from the state so that we could use it for one-time expenses for student educational needs.
Okay, Councilmember Warner, questions? Do you foresee a circumstance whereby this site would be reused as a school?
We do not. The Property Advisory Committee that met from 2012 to 2014 looked at all of the school sites in the district. Their recommendation was that at that time we had 4 surplus school sites, and they saw no eventuality in which we'd reopen the Sonoma site. So we also have Arroyo Mocho and Almond Avenue that are being underutilized. They're not being used for elementary school sites. Because of the growth projections in the city, the location of those new housing tracts, we could not imagine any situation in which the Sonoma school site would be utilized as a school.
All right, great, thank you. Any other questions at this point? Okay, with that point, thank you, Mr. Van Schack. I'm going to open up the public hearing. Got about 20 cards. From the applicant.
Thank you. Apologize, Mayor Marchand. Scott Roylands from Lyon Homes. We are the applicant working with the school district. First of all, I would really like to thank Frank and staff for all their work and again, the thorough presentation. I will not try to be terribly repetitive, but just would like to highlight a couple things. We became involved with the school district on this site back in January of last year. An important data point for us was that the school had already designated this site as a surplus. Before we became involved, the school had already made the conscious decision that this would no longer be a school at any point in time in the future. It was also important that as part of that process, it was offered to both the city, LARPD, and other public agencies for purchase and for their use, and public agencies all declined to use this site. Again, those were important aspects for us before we made the commitment to work with the district on this project. The other commitment that we made to the district was that we would work hand in hand and really involve the neighborhood as we designed the project. Knowing that we would be designing a project within some existing homes, there's a balance that we need to create to provide the funds needed for the school district, but also provide something that fits within the community. So as Frank mentioned, our proposal is a subdivision that's the exact same zoning designation as the existing homes around it. We are not asking for any variations or any deviations from the existing zoning designation on the existing homes surrounding the project. And Frank, would you mind just kind of flipping through a couple things? We also held several very well-attended public meetings. Starting in February of last year, we had our first public meeting where we introduced ourselves to the neighbors, and that was very well attended. Close to 40 people showed up. And we proposed homes that looked very similar to this. And we received comments from the neighbors that said, hey, thank you, but what can you do to maybe increase our privacy a little bit in the rear yards? And so as a direct result for that, we moved all the bigger ingress-egress windows to the sides of the homes and put high ventilation windows. We also increased the depth of the lots, as mentioned in the staff report. We told the adjacent neighbors that we would replace every fence in the rear yards, with a few exceptions. There's some folks that have really nice fences, so we'll work with them on keeping those nice fences. And then also plant the tall shrubbery in the back of the homes. We made those adjustments, met with the neighborhood again in March, and walked out with a very positive reaction. The neighbors, by and large, said, thank you for listening to our concerns, and thank you for doing what you did to the subdivision. From that point, we worked with staff, finalized our application, had another meeting in September of this year, met with the neighbors and said, hey, look, we finalized our application. We've kept our word. We've made no adjustments from what we told you back in March. Again, the response that we received was, thank you for listening to our concerns and thank you for meeting with us and engaging with us. Since that time, we've been to the Historic Commission, received approval, or the certificate of permission to demo the site. Also went to Planning Commission, received approval from the Planning Commission. More recently, knowing that we were coming to City Council, we've engaged with many of the property owners in the immediate neighborhood. Over the past week, you've seen that we have 18 immediate neighborhood folks who have signed favorable petitions asking you to support the project, and there are several folks here in the community tonight. Again, just a couple data points. Today, in talking to the school district, they encouraged us, if you see there's a Lot A on the landscape parcel, to put a small plaque on our landscape plans indicating that this was a Sonoma school site historically. And so we'll work with staff on putting a small plaque on parcel A indicating that this was a site for historical uses or this was an elementary school. So again, just going through the slides really quick. It should also be noted, and I know that there, in staff report, there was some difference in the site. Should be noted that there's differences in the site elevations today. If you went and walked around the perimeter of the site, there are portions of the property that are 3 feet lower, portions of the property that are 3 feet higher from the existing neighbors. And so again, we've worked with individual neighbors on making sure they understand how that'll impact, again, their homes and their lots. One final point, just on the architecture. The RL zoning district allows homes to be built up to 35 feet high. We specifically intentionally worked with the neighbors and with our architecture to make sure that the tops of our homes are no taller than 27 feet high. So substantially lower than that which is allowed by zoning code. Just flipping through. And again, Frank highlighted the cross section, so I won't go through those as well. Just would like to emphasize that we've worked with the neighborhood. We're excited and appreciative to be here in Livermore. Got our consultant team and Steve Jones, our project manager. Should there be any questions that follow after public testimony, appreciate the opportunity to interface with the council at that point in time. Thank you and appreciate your support for our proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Roy Lance. Any further questions at this point? Yes. Oh, you're the other applicant. Yes.
I'm back.
Yes.
So they told me that I would have
Dr.
3 minutes if I
Bowers.
filled out a card. I could be part of the presentation since it's about the school
Okay, so you're
district
part
property.
of, so yeah,
Thank you.
you're part of the
I still
presentation.
won't be that one.
Dr. Bowers.
So good evening again, Mayor Marchand, Vice Mayor Spadowski, and Honorable City Council members Warner, Coomer, and Carling. I'm Callie Bowers. I'm the Superintendent of Schools for the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District, as well as a Livermore resident for well over 2 decades. I'm here tonight to speak to you on behalf of more than 13,000 students, TK through 12, and 1,500 plus hardworking staff members in our district. In regard to the decision before you, the Sonoma site rezoning and subsequent property sale and development, I'd like to take this opportunity to first and foremost assure you that the LVJUSD has done its due diligence and its homework in regard to the requisite extensive research, in-depth demographic studies, and updated enrollment projections, vetting, planning, undergoing the property advisory committee process for surplus properties, and publicly noticed sale. I respectfully remind you that school districts, as Mr. Venchak said earlier, by law are not supposed to be in the real estate or the leasing business. In fact, we're subject to hefty state fines on an annual basis for maintaining underutilized properties or campuses. That's because our primary purpose is to educate children and to judiciously secure and devote any and all resources possible in order to do so. And that's true in this case. So with that aim in mind, rest assured the Sonoma site rezoning and subsequent property sale proceeds will directly benefit our youth and our community. You have our word, the funds will be allocated toward technology, instructional materials, programs, textbook adoptions, as well as facility improvements. As you've seen and heard from William Lyon, this is not thoughtless suburban sprawl. It's smart, well-designed, infill redevelopment. This particular developer has been exceptionally responsive to the community. He's a member of our community. His kids go to our schools. I think he may have gone to one of our schools too, as well. I'm not sure on that, which is refreshing and admirable. I know from firsthand experience, as does our city's police force, that keeping this vacant property secure from vandalism has been a costly proposition. The funds would be much better earmarked to directly serve kids rather than paying, as we do now, 24-hour security guards. During the winter break, there was a fire on the site due to arson. I believe our city manager and the mayor received calls from me that day. We were there. Luckily and thankfully, it resulted in only property damage and no injuries to Livermore, citizens or firefighters or their property. However, it became crystal clear to all of us, including first responders from the city, that the site has become a liability, an accident waiting to happen, and it has the potential to become a public nuisance. We need to move forward expeditiously with demolition and redevelopment to add beauty and useful purpose to this neighborhood. Please know this is not the first public vote on an important aspect of this particular project. This has been going through a public process for many years coming to you. Albeit this vote is probably the most important one because it has the potential to stop our many months and years of work right in our tracks. I respectfully remind you that the Livermore School District Property Advisory Committee, the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School Board of Trustees, the State Allocation Board, the Livermore Historic Preservation Commission, and the Livermore Planning Commission all studied this project separately and publicly debated its merits before voting all unanimously in favor of this sale or the project aspect that came before them in order to keep moving forward. That's quite a track record of support, I'm getting close, by very capable professionals who care deeply and are invested in their roles, our community, and its future viability. In the thorough and detailed report, your own city staff recommended that you approve this rezoning as well, and I urge you to honor their work, the process they've gone through, and the recommendations in time. They've taken their charge seriously, and they held the developers to do the right thing. I sincerely hope you, our esteemed mayor and council, take this opportunity this evening, just as you did earlier in presenting a proclamation, to show your visible and unanimous support of our youth by taking action and supporting our public education system. In closing, I'd like to thank you for listening, for taking your role as elected officials so seriously, and thank you, too, for your partnership and your vote of confidence in a project worthy of your approval that will benefit so many children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bowers. Okay, so now I'm going to open up the public hearing, unless there's another applicant hiding out there somewhere. Okay, with that, I'm going to open the public hearing. We've got about 20 or so cards. So once again, I ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. With that, and if you agree, raise your hand. And if you would like what somebody said, just what he said, and you don't necessarily have to repeat everything. So Jeremiah Curtis, Don Argula, and Michael Della Rosa. Mr. Curtis. And young Curtis.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you. Just have to say, I'm from Livermore. I've been here my whole life. My father was a carpenter. I was a carpenter as a young man. I understand that expanding and building is, part of growth. But I don't know what exact same rezoning means, but when all the homes are 1,000 square feet, maybe 1,500 to 1,700 square feet with additions, and putting in the center of the neighborhood 50-plus homes that are 3,000 square feet and 2 stories high, it doesn't fit the neighborhood. The zoning might be the same, but it doesn't fit into the neighborhood. I know it's going to be tough to sway the vote to put a school there or a park, skate park, ball fields, anything. But I just have to say that if they came to us with a plan of putting in homes that were maybe around 2,000 square feet, it would be a lot easier to blend in with the neighborhood than the new homes they're putting in. As a youngster, I helped build large luxury homes, but those were in neighborhoods that weren't developed, and the entire neighborhood was that size. Normandy, on the outskirts of Concannon. I mean, there's a place for large homes in Livermore, but in our neighborhood, I don't think it's the place for those homes. And then someone mentioned something about 4 parks within 3/4 of a mile. I'd like to know where those are. Granada Little League and Mendenhall, which is kind of one property. In my mind, that's the only one that's maybe even close to that distance. You can't use the high school. There's a park over off Merdell, but that's not 3/4 of a mile away. I'd really like to see a park there. We're taking the school out. The community's losing something. I'd like the community to get something back, and putting in a bunch of homes that, frankly, people that work and live in Livermore aren't going to be able to afford. It just doesn't feel right. So with that, thank you for your time, and you guys have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis.
Let's go, bud.
Don Argula, Michael De La Rosa, Gene Watson.
Thank you, Mayor Marchand and council members. Don Argula, CEO of the Livermore Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'm here to express support for rezoning of the Sonoma Elementary School site property from educational to residential. This effort aligns with the Chamber priority to support efforts to provide sufficient housing for all economic levels of the housing market. The Chamber acknowledges the deliberative process that the elected members of the Livermore School Board undertook to arrive at this decision, as Dr. Bowers mentioned, and it supports this prudent use of public funds for this purpose. It provides an opportunity for the City of Livermore to consider new residential development within an existing residential neighborhood in an effort for the city to meet its obligations as it relates to the housing needs of the community. And the Chamber strongly supports the City of Livermore in this effort. It also supports the plan submitted by William Lyon Homes to build a 54 single-family residential neighborhood on the site. This developer has worked with the city and the adjacent neighbors to plan and design a project that meets the city's requirements for such projects, that addresses impacts, including those from construction, as well as those from the new use of this parcel, and that complements the existing neighborhood. The Chamber supports this and appreciates the city's due diligence required to effectively plan for the Livermore community. We look forward to supporting the school district and William Lyon Homes and the city and for the conversion of the school site property to residential, and we urge your support of this request. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael De La Rosa, Gene Watson, Michael, I'll get to it in a second.
Hi, I'm Mike De La Rosa. Thanks for your time. I am a neighbor that actually lives right across the street from the site at 530 Sonoma Avenue. I'll start out by saying I'm in support of the project and the rezoning change to residential, really for 3 main reasons. We've got 2 elementary schools within walking distance, 2 middle schools, or a K through 8th and an elementary and a middle school within walking distance from my house. Second is traffic. I personally don't want to see that turn into a school again. We have Granada High School just at the end of the street, and you just about can't get out of the driveway, at 8 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you combine that with school traffic right across the street, it would be dangerous and a big nuisance to the area. Third is the condition of that existing school. I think as a taxpayer, I don't think it's a smart use of our money to invest in a school that's that far gone. It would be a lot of money to get that school back up and running to a place that I would feel safe sending my kids. I'll also vouch for the fact that the developer, William Lyons Homes, they've done a great job with outreach to the community, listening to our concerns and responding to them. So I think the process went really well between the district and the developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Del Rosa. Jeannie Watson, Michael Jenkins, Dave Slade.
Hi, I'm Jean Watson. I live on El Caminito. I am against the amount of two-story homes being built. They will tower over the neighborhood. Our two-story homes are about every 6 or 10 homes, so to have 50 of them in one area is definitely not fitting the neighborhood. Single-family homes, homes for our teachers, firefighters, and others in the community who need homes that they can afford, especially our children growing up. I know all of mine are saying they can't afford to live in this area. So if we could build smaller homes that they could have a starter home. As far as parking, there will not be enough parking. I currently am having discussions with my neighbor. My neighbors across the street are upset that their neighbors are parking in their areas of parking. There will definitely not be enough parking. And then as the children grow up and have cars, there's more cars to park and no space to put them. The neighborhood needs to stay the way it is in the same building of single story and a few two-story. And a park in the neighborhood would be great. I can tell you I would always have to put my kids in the car and drive them to a park. We do not have a park in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Michael Jenkins, Dave Slade, Dorothy Finney Slade. Mr. Slade. Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Michael Jenkins. Sorry. Michael Jenkins. Michael Jenkins going once, twice. On Laguna Street. Okay. Dave Slade, Dorothy Finney Slade, Maria Colomagno.
Thank you very much, Mayor, City Council members. Thank you for hearing me. I'm here to recommend that if we are considering rezoning this property, that we set aside a couple acres for a neighborhood park. And that we also waive the fees that we are charging this developer if he chooses to buy this parcel, to not relocate our park money to an area outside the neighborhood, but let's keep that park in the neighborhood. And so I think it should be a quid pro quo. I mean, up to the time when the kids were growing up in the neighborhood, we used the schoolyards for soccer practice. On the weekends, we used it for softball practice, Little League practice. It wasn't until just very recently that the schools decided to all be closed campus and put fences and barriers around all the open property that the neighborhood used to use as part of the community sports activities. And so I would urge, as we consider rezoning this property, that we consider setting aside some of that property to be open space for a park and to offset the development fees that you're going to charge this contractor to maintain our space in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slade. Dorothy Finney Slade, Maria Carlamagno, and Kevin Perry.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, thank you for the opportunity for me to present my opposition to the rezoning and sale of the Sonoma school site. I do call into question some of the Livermore School District's projection numbers. In its own report, the Livermore School District indicated that it could handle a 1% to 1.5% growth unless, and I quote, a major increase in student population that could come as a result of the charter school closure or extensive development within the city. Well, the charter school did close, and it just lost its accreditation, and that has happened just very recently after all of this has started. And so what I'd like now is, I think LVJ USD needs to stop and recalibrate its enrollment forecast before selling any more school property. The other thing is they've been looking at the development growth in their paperwork, and they're only talking about growth north of 580 and in the downtown area. They aren't taking into consideration any of the new growth that is along Vasco Road or on the southeast portion of Livermore. And if we take the Livermore General Plan's numbers of possibly building 400 to 450 new homes, and you take LVJ USD's own figure of 0.68 students per new house, you're still talking over 3,000 students in the next 10 years. And they say that they only have a maximum capacity enrollment of adding an additional 1,900 students. So at some point, we are a new school. Now, one of the things that I can say about the Sonoma school site is 2 blocks from Granada High. There are several different possibilities for that site. It was used by the Livermore School District as an elementary school until '89. It was then used by the Livermore School District as Del Val Continuation School until the early 2000s, and then the charter school used it for 10 years. So it's only been in the last couple of years that that school site has not been used. It's 2 blocks from Granada High. It could be used very easily, but it would be really nice to build an ROP campus next to the high school instead of using the Arroyo Moco campus, which is an elementary school, and return Arroyo Moco to an elementary school to help alleviate some of the congestion at Sunset. The other figures that the school district shows is that there's a maximum capacity at Sunset of 800, and yet they have 878 students, and they're trying to add TK classes there next fall. Joe Mitchell is at capacity. They're turning away enrollment. Smith is at capacity. Mendenhall, when the charter school closed, did not even admit any of the charter school middle school kids. So regardless of what is being said, I'm questioning the school district's openness about saying if they have 350 transfer kids in that are not from that neighborhood, are they going to be telling the parents of those transfer kids, sorry, your kid can't come back here next year because we have some homeschooled kids that are in this neighborhood? There's just some things I would like the city council to have another closer look at some of these figures that are being presented to you by the school district, because there has been a lot of things that have changed over the last 2 years, including impact from the Silicon Valley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Finney-Slade. Maria Carlomagno, Kevin Perry, Kristen Madsen.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council members. Thank you for the opportunity to present my concern about the rezoning of the Sonoma school site. I want to express my opposition to the rezoning and the proposed house development because it is inappropriate for our neighborhood. This is an old neighborhood with old-style ranch homes built in the early 60s. It is a working-class neighborhood comprised of mostly one-story homes. Of the 48 existing homes around the perimeter of the Sonoma site, only 8 are two-story. The height of the existing one-story homes is about 15 feet, in stark contrast with the 28 feet height of the new proposed homes, which are two-story homes in smaller lot sizes. The new higher density homes range from 2,700 to 3,000 square feet, while the existing homes average 1,500 square feet. Only 3 homes in the new development have a lower square footage of 2,100 square feet. Although the new development meets the requirement for the low residential zoning, the reality is that few of the original single homes have been remodeled into two-story homes. If owners have not built up in these past 60 years, they're not going to do in the next 60 years, most likely. This new house development just does not blend in. Driving into the area, we will be seeing a group of homes protruding above the existing homes like mushrooms. How can that look architecturally good? I'm one of the residents around the perimeter, and I'm with the majority of them who opposes this rezoning, since we will be the most affected. Suddenly, a cement retaining wall ranging from 1.5 to 3 feet will be dumped in our backyard. And on top of that, a 6-foot fence that will do nothing to mitigate our privacy. That fence is lower than the windows of the first floor of the new homes, so the new owners can easily look into our yards, and we saw that in the presentation. The proposed shrub trees are not a permanent solution to protect our privacy. The new owners can decide to remove them at any time. There is no buffer zone of any time in the proposed project. No green space, park, or even a tot lot to compensate for the amenities the site used to offer to the neighborhood residents. William Lyon Homes is paying $1.9 million in park and open space impact fees to essentially remove our neighborhood open space and move it to North Livermore. We need the money to be invested in the same area. Livermore urban areas need open spaces too. Here is a map of the parks in our neighborhood presented by William Lyon Homes. It does not represent the 0.5-mile standard for a park by the city and LARPD. The half-mile radius marked in black is by air. But people don't fly. They either walk, ride, or drive to a nearby park. And El Padre is the closest park at 0.9 miles from the Sonoma school site, hence reiterating one more time the need of a park in this area. There is nothing in this development plan that benefits the existing neighborhood. Our neighborhood will be negatively impacted by the loss of this important amenity. Both the loss of a park and the mitigation fee paid will not cover the loss of service that was meant to benefit this neighborhood with the site zoned E. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Perry, Kristen Madsen, Tristan Newth.
Good evening. My name's Kevin Perry. I'm at 710 Wall Street, just down the street from Granada. My wife and I moved here 8-9 years ago, basically in large part because of the Livermore schools, and had great dealings with Mr. Van Schack and Mendenhall and Granada High. I will say that, yes, I feel that that the projections may be just a tad shy of the mark because of the great deal of growth that the area has been going through. More and more people will be commuting to the city and Oakland from our area. Furthermore, what really got me going this morning, or out here tonight, is met with my neighbor yesterday who was part of the failed charter school plan, which just took funds away from our public schools. But that said, he's now going to school over off Vasco Road in the middle school because Mendenhall would not take any of the kids, and he's now looking at a half-hour commute each way from the school just down the street. Furthermore, the park aspect, whereas previously we could, I understand the idea behind having closed campuses, but with the street layouts in Sunset Development, the 0.5 miles by air to to Idaho and Pleasure Island Park and the park off Merdale, I forget the name of it, is a significant travel restriction, and a lot of people do not want their kids riding their bicycles that far, even though it's relatively safe. And then the other point I wanted to make is parking is going to be wholly inadequate, because I don't know about anybody else in this room, but I cannot currently park 2 cars in my 2-car garage. And with the houses being 3,000 plus square feet, larger families, parking is just going to seriously impinge on the neighbors. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Kristen Madsen, Tristan Newth, and Michael Jenkins.
Hi, I'm Kristen Madsen. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to say something here. I live across the street from Sonoma Avenue School. One of the first pictures that was shown in there with all the boards, boarded up school, yeah, that's what I look at every time I walk out my front door. My 8-year-old looks out the window over Christmas break and says, "Mommy, there's fire engines going down the street with lights on." No, they're out there all the time. No, there's smoke. Yeah, right out my front door. There's 8 fire engines out there. This place is getting to be a hazard. We moved here in 2015, and we bought the house with the intention of not having a school in front of us. Sure, it would be nice if there was a park, but if I'm not mistaken, it was offered to the parks, and it was offered everywhere else. And it wasn't until it was offered to residential before anybody took a bite on that possibility. The housing has been great. William Lyons has done a fantastic job. I think two of these guys know some of us better than they know their own neighbors. They've really worked well with the neighborhood. They had meetings several times, and people walked away. They listened to the comments. I have a daughter that's at Joe Mitchell. I have a 3-year-old son who would be going to Joe Mitchell. The only thing I see with the school situation is that my daughter has 4 kids that live in Pleasanton. So my opinion is that the district needs to close out of Livermore. Those 2 of those kids have 3 siblings in Joe Mitchell, and they don't live in Livermore. So my thought is, why are we letting people outside of Livermore into the schools? But that is a separate issue from what the school district needs to do with this property. I don't see this property being anything of being built back up as usable facility. Leveled and rebuilt, I don't know. I don't know if that's a possibility. I'm in support of the project. They've done a great job, and I hope it goes through. And I hope the neighborhood doesn't battle over it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Madsen. Tristan Newth, Michael Jenkins, Doug Mann.
Good evening. My name is Tristan Knuth. I am grateful for the opportunity that I have to share my opinion and my feelings about the new housing development that has been proposed. I would first like to point out of how wonderful a blessing and privilege each of us have to live in Livermore, California. 3 weeks ago, I returned from a church service mission in Philadelphia. And while in those 2 years, I spent those 2 years serving the community of Philadelphia. And in those 2 years, I learned that Livermore is one of the best places to grow up. My family moved here in 2004, and I was 8 years old. I attended the Sunset Elementary School, the charter school, middle school, and Granada High School. And I see no negative effects in wanting to give families the opportunity to move to Livermore, California. When my family moved here, there were 6 kids already, not necessarily a new family, but regardless, we were looking for a new home. And I return and repeat that I see nothing negative with giving those new families the opportunity to move to Livermore, California. And I support this new housing development.
Thank you. Michael Jenkins, Doug Mann, Dick Corso. No Michael Jenkins. Okay, Doug Mann, Dick Corso, Jason Bessis.
Good evening again. The point I'd probably like to make most strongly tonight is that this is the first, I believe it's the first zoning vote that this new council has. And so this is particularly important to the 2 new members, I think. And I want you to take this very seriously. These votes that you make on the council are more important than any of the decisions that you make, any of them. That includes hiring a city manager, hiring a police chief, or any of the others, because zoning is permanent. You can't take it back, and you should only make zoning changes after thorough consideration. Second on the list would be, yes, listen to the neighbors. I'm not a neighbor in the neighborhood, so I wouldn't be the primary person to take under consideration, but you are hearing from the neighbors in the neighborhood, and I'd like you to put their needs first. Right now, we have a couple of very interested parties presenting to you. We have a developer which has put a lot of work into something that they want to make a lot of money on. Now, that's typical. Councils hear that all the time. That's nothing new. A lot of times, we also have like a dastardly landowner who just wants to get as much money for his land as he can, and so he is pushing for a project to go through and a zoning change to take place. In this case, at least it's the school district. They're not going to do something, awful with their money. They're going to put it, of course, into school operations, and no one can be against that. But at the same time, they would like this done, and they want to to unload this property and get as much money as they can for it. And even though it helps a good cause, the dynamic is still the same. They're in it for their interest, and I want you to pay attention to that. I think you should go for a unanimous vote on this. If you have any discord, if any of you don't like what you're seeing here, I would hope that this council on this issue can vote unanimously if you decide to rezone this for something else. I'd like to see some of that repair of sort of the less discord in the community versus what happened in the Lucky Center development process. I'd like to see us have a different process for this and not have this turn into something that is difficult to deal with. Just a couple more things. That's always been a job center. People have always worked there. I think homogenizing that whole area to be just houses, once again, especially after taking out the retail that was at El Caminito, might not be the best idea. Has this really been proposed? Has the question really been asked to the neighborhood? Look, if you could have anything there, would you like some jobs there and a park? Or has it been presented, school district's going to sell for houses, what kind of houses do you want? It's a very different question, and I think you shouldn't rezone it tonight. It's too early. You need a little more consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Dick Corso, Jason Bezos, Dale Kay.
Can I bring these up?
City Clerk, please.
When a property's got a memorial plaque on it that's the same year as you were born, you start thinking. Anyways, maybe you can leave the year off. Mayor, thank you, and Council, thank you very much for taking the time. What you have before you is a petition signed by 138 community members who are voters in this community in favor of supporting this moving forward with the rezoning and enabling the sale for LVJ USD. I do want to correct one thing previously, and that one thing that I heard previously was that the school district has, is vested interest in developing real estate. That's not what this is about. This is about they are compelled to sell a property based on the law. And so what I'd like for us to remember is as we're going through all of that and you're making your determination, the school district has to make it, they're moving forward because they have to. I look at the plans and I think, it's often true that cities see infill kinds of situations like this. I grew up in a city in the South Bay where one after the other schools did close because of the population shifts and houses did go in and they were different. And over time, that's part of the neighborhood. And I would really encourage you that, this is a good positive time for us building infill housing. Instead of us trying to build places out in the hills that will be obvious, like the city of Dublin. What I'd like to see you remember too is that in this, there's $10.3 million that are going to go back to the schools. There's $800,000 going back to LARPD, and there's approximately $1.1 million, I didn't hear that stated earlier, that'll go back to the city for open space impact. I'm not sure what open space impact is. Maybe somebody can tell us what that sounds like, but those are the two things that I think are the things that I think are important. So thank you very much. 138 people, including myself, support this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Corso, thank you. Jason Bezos, Dale Kay, Jerry Yalon.
Good evening. I'm strongly opposed to this rezoning as it currently stands in your packet. In the last 6 to 7 hours, there's been a 180-degree reversal, because when I spoke to Mr. Scott Roylands, the developer, just this afternoon about 2:30, and he says there's not a practical way to say this is once a school site. He was not interested in putting a plaque or a historical marker, and after I emailed the school board this afternoon, I got a nice phone call from Superintendent Bowers saying, well, I don't understand where that comes from. So if that truly is going to be a marker, that needs to be a condition of approval. But I'm just bothered by this, the fact that this was not considered as a part of the Historic Preservation Commission should have found a way to have a plaque there. Because a school site that's been there for half a century, you know, there's a lot of history there. There are a lot of people who have gone through an institution, staff, students, others, and it's a small thing. It's not like anyone said, oh, save the school building, save part of the school, but I just think that was not a good faith effort, because if they're not interested in the site's past, how are they interested in the future of the community? And I'm pleased that there's been a 180-degree reversal in the past 7 hours, but I was even told then at the time, well, they could just pry off the plaque there that was referred to earlier, and maybe the school district will put it in a closet. They can come pick it up, or the Heritage Guild might want to have it, put it someplace. I think that's outrageous. There needs to be a condition of approval there that says this is what it is, and maybe it should include that plaque, the Truth, Liberty, Toleration, whatever the Native Sons plaque was. It was significant enough to get its photo in the newspaper back in the Herald back in 1962, and it was dedicated. And the school's also significant because that was the end of double session soon. At the time that school opened. There's a lot of crowding in the schools at the time. But what bothers me about this is, again, there's just erasing, creating a blank slate. That's what you're doing with the downtown catalyst parcel, moving the depot. That's what you did with the Wagner Winery. Fortunately, that was reversed. But just even a plaque, I mean, I found that outrageous. You know, and it wasn't until, and fortunately in this case, the school district owns the land, but if this had been a completely private developer, they could have given the middle finger, and I would have had to come or even more pleading with you. And I just don't like that at all. And it suggests to me there might be other problems. Also with the parkland, I mean, unlike other schools like Rincon, for example, and other places, when you demolish the school, there was an LAPD park next to it. So here, this park has been used, and even LAPD, I think, gave money back in the 60s for some of the uses there. It is sort of like a neighborhood park. Isn't there some way that you can find to reserve part of the land there, even with that Chestnut and P, your last meeting, that Mid-Penn development you just approved, there's a tot lot within it. Isn't there some neighborhood amenity where they can point to? I mean, this plaque is nice, and this monument that I hope has, again, the Native Sons, it has to be in writing, but there needs to be looking into more about that. And John Shirley's reminiscence books, he talks here back in the 1960s about the Livermore Park Ordinance, got imposed. It was a model in the state in the 1960s because Mossad Mayron did not want to put parks in Sunset West, and there's a lengthy court battle, but he refers to it on page 21 here in the book. So this is a place with a lot of history in terms of fighting for parks, and you shouldn't let this one get away so easily. And again, I want to see conditions of development and I'd like to see that Native Sons plaque there where it belongs in perpetuity as a reminder of the thousands of people who enjoyed that as a school, a beloved institution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bezos. Dale Kay, Jerry Alon, and Mark Miller.
Good evening again, Mayor and members of City Council. I'm Dale Kay with Innovation Tri-Valley, and I am here, of course, to express our support because we have done this through the process for the Livermore Sonoma Elementary School site to be rezoned from educational to residential. One of our members is the Livermore School District, and I just have to say how much I respect them. I know Dr. Bowers got an award earlier this evening. They are truly visionary, they're truly generous, and their integrity cannot be attacked. They know what they're doing, so let's continue to trust them. As you realize, Innovation Tri-Valley is focused strongly on housing. And for our workforce, it's important to our businesses, but it's also important to our future. Our history is amazingly, amazingly important, but there's nothing more important than our future and what we give to our children who continue to live here and to work here. Innovation Tri-Valley also supports the plan submitted by William Lyons Home to build 54 single-family homes. This developer, we have heard from many people who's worked so well with the city and has done a tremendous outreach program with the neighbors. They are very sincere in their effort. They love Livermore. I think they're going to make it an even better place. So we hope you consider this rezoning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kay. Jerry Alon, Mark Miller. I had a second card for Jeremiah Curtis, but he already spoke. So Jerry Alon, Mark Miller, and Craig Bueno.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I was the co-chair for the Yes on Measure J matter that helped raise $245 million in bond funds for school facility improvements here in Livermore. That was last June that the voters of Livermore said it's time to move forward, it's time to step up with the schools. So this is an opportunity for the schools to move forward, get rid of a property that has become a burden, use the money from that facility as it is permitted under the law for new good school purposes, school-related purposes, for the city of Livermore to move forward, increase its housing, which will raise property taxes, bring families that will use the businesses here in town. The plan may not be perfect. I can't say that I'm an expert on such things. I don't know that there are many people that can say they are experts. But this seems to be well thought through and was very open to the community in its adoption. So I think this meets the needs of the whole of Livermore, its people, its students, its schools, and its businesses. And I hope that you'll vote in favor of adopting the resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yulon. Mark Miller, Craig Bueno. Mr. Miller.
Good evening. I've been living here since summer 2014. I live in the Sunset West area, and when I got here, I was told by the principal of Emma Smith that, forget it, there's no room here. We are impacted, we have a waiting list, there's no chance of your kids coming to this school. So we went to Joe Mitchell, and we were told a similar story, except that they were erecting temporary classrooms, portables, and therefore were able to take on more students. We found that these portables they have air conditioning that cannot keep up with Livermore heat. They're extremely noisy, and my daughter said that she couldn't hear the teacher most of the time. And my understanding is that most of the middle school students are in these temporary classrooms as well, experiencing similar problems. It just seems that especially when you consider the additional kids that are coming in from the charter schools, these classrooms are stuffed to the brim to the point that the kids are being asked to put their backpacks on the outside and their personal belongings are being stolen. It just seems like this idea of rezoning and building additional houses so that more students can go into Joe Mitchell is not thought out. It seems like they're over-enrolled at this point, and I don't see where these kids are going to go. If you want to tear down Sonoma School, I mean, I don't have a preference either way. I haven't lived here as long as the others that have spoken here today. But the solution to where these kids are going to go to school and Joe Mitchell in particular, it's like, where are you going to stuff these kids that they're going to be able to get a good education and learn? It doesn't seem like it's really fair to the kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. My last card is Craig Bueno. Mr. Bueno.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. My name's Craig Bueno, President of the Livermore School Board. Been on there for 2 years. And if I could just take just one point of personal privilege, just to let you know how happy I am with Gillig moving here. I'm the former fire chief, City of Hayward. I spent 28 years there working for the city. It is a great company. They give back more to the community than they take.
It's a stellar move. We're really, really fortunate to get those people coming here. Beyond the jobs and everything else, they're good people. I mean, I work with them on projects, a lot of sensitive stuff, regulatory things, great people. Okay, so getting back to the school issue. Working for the city and being real busy, I didn't have a whole bunch of time to put into the schools here outside of just volunteer coaching and things. All three of my sons are all adults, all went to Livermore Public Schools. So being on the school board here, this is just kind of a give back for me. I've lived, and I live here. I'm in this neighborhood where this school's at. And I've been in a Sunset home for 32 years. It's a nice little community. I love it. I'm not going anywhere. And what I wanted to say is, as someone who's elected, a lot of the questions that were asked, hypothetical or not, that's our job on the school board, is to ask those questions. And I believe, and I'm, kind of a skeptic on a lot of things, and we have asked those questions, and I believe they've been answered very well. I am personally satisfied. I sat on the interview panel for the realtors, sat on the interview panel for the developers, gone through packets and packets of things. It's an abandoned school. It's not being used. Whenever they laid all these schools out, however many years ago, back in the 60s, there's a whole bunch of these schools right in a row, but there's no schools south of Kincannon. That was decisions that were made way back. But I'm very satisfied with the effort that Mr. Van Schack, the study. It is up to date. The consideration for the charter's already been, given. It's all factored in. We have open enrollment, and that's a way that kids can get choice, so you don't get pockets of things, and kids they can move from school to school. And Dr. Bowers makes sure that we have that, because this school here at Mitchell, the reason it has a lot of kids, it's an IB school. We're one of the only public school districts that has IB, International Baccalaureate, from K all the way through 12, with Granada just being granted that. So it's a magnet school. I mean, that's why a lot of kids want to go there. We have culinary arts at Fifth Street School, Del Val School. We have a lot of, STEM programs like at Arroyo Seco. There's a lot of specific things that happen in a lot of these schools that draw kids from other areas. But all in all, homeschools, when you say homeschool, I'm referring to the kids who would normally walk to the school that's in that neighborhood. I believe that there's only a half dozen kids out of over 13,000 that are currently not in their home school because of this rotation. So it's not as though the schools are so jam-packed that we don't have room. We have plenty of room, and we have a couple of surplus schools still. Arroyo Mocho and Almond is, I think there's 86 kids at Almond School. That's the home school and independent study. So I'm in support of it. I believe it's been vetted extremely thoroughly as an elected official and the high vote getter in the last election. I'll say they did a lot of work, and I'm real confident with it. And the staff has done a great job for us. So I stand in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bueno. If you could hand that to the city clerk, please. Ms. Copps?
Hi, I was fortunate to sit next to a lot of the neighborhood, and I see a lot of their hands going up, and I was listening, and I really think that we need to listen to the density of it. As a substitute, one of the toughest schools to get to back in the day, and that was a few years ago, was Granada. In the morning, I could get to any school on time. Granada was hard, that traffic at school. I'm not sure if it's changed, and the numbers probably have. But what I don't like and I didn't see it, I was sitting at an angle where I could not see the project, but I do not like it when we invade a neighborhood and change the character of the neighborhood. I think that at the Springtown Park deal that I've been going to, I mean, I cry when I leave my neighborhood sometimes. I do not like those densities. It's not, I mean, they're not even selling. And I don't know how it compared to this, but maybe we should keep the values consistent, the square footage consistent, or at least somewhat consistent to what's original. I think it's really doing a disservice to pack as much as we can. We all know there's a financial incentive for that. And it's like you really need to get some balance going with that. We need homes. Infill's cool, but if it changes your character of your neighborhood, it's not. A week ago, there were like 13 or 14 men digging up the street. I asked for a permit on it. No one knows why they're there in my neighborhood. I'm mad about that. We need to start planning, and we need to start planning with the existing structure in mind. Infill's cool, but be kind to people who live there. You know, you're riding on their tax dollars. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Copps. Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. It's 9 o'clock. Time for a quick break. Let's take about 10 minutes, and then we'll be back here. Thank you. We'll be right back. I'm going to bring it back to the council. Council, have any questions at this point? Question for Councilmember Warner?
Yeah, it's more a question maybe for staff can help, but you know, to what extent do city councils generally, provide oversight to school boards? I mean, it seems, I mean, just point of view is that the school board has a certain set of responsibilities and the city council has a certain amount. So any advice from the staff as to how you think about the separation of powers there?
Honorable Council Member, your question gave the answer, which is state law actually gives you certain responsibilities and requirements that you have to follow as a city council, and does the same exact thing for the school board. And of course, you have heard a testimony from a representative of the school board. You've heard testimony from representatives of their staff. And the question for you is at least there some evidence that they rationally went through the process that they were required to by law? The record, at least from your staff's opinion, shows that yes, they did follow state law. They did go through the steps they were required to do. They did cooperate with our staff in evaluating future needs and future student generation. We are comfortable that they certainly have a very good idea of where future development is going to happen within the city, and they've come to their independent conclusions about what the use of the site is. So from that perspective, it is not the role of the council to substitute your judgment for the school district as to should this be a school, or what school should it be, or what school offerings should happen at that. That by law, of course, is their responsibility.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at this point? Okay, let's comments. Councilmember Coomber.
Well, I'm just trying to think of where to start. Should probably go alphabetically, but I can't remember what part of the alphabet to start with.
Start one end or the other. So this one will start in this end. Last week we started that end.
I enjoyed hearing from everybody. Rezoning is a tremendous responsibility. But I've looked at this since I was on the LARPD board when it came to us to purchase the surplus property. That property was being surplused. It was a little too expensive for us, so we passed. We knew what was going to happen. And the short version is the world is getting more compressed. That's a sorry fact of our world these days, and we're going to have to build to accommodate some things. I, too, would love to see a park in that neighborhood. I would love to see something there so kids can go out and play in a tot lot. I would love to see a couple of single-story units for those like myself who may use a stairway once in a while for recreational purposes, but it's got no real use other than that. And people like my parents who are well into their 90s and would love to be living out close to it. There are no single-story new homes going in here, and that's something I would like any developer who may be listening to take note, because that's something I'm going to push for. I do believe the offset of that is that the school district gets a help with a very stressed budget, and again, we know that from having worked with them in many arenas in the past, that there's a lot they have to accomplish. And keeping an empty school on a site that is no longer capable of supporting a school, I think this is the best thing we can do is proceed with the rezoning and with the infill. We chose the infill route when we chose the urban growth boundary. And I stand by the urban growth boundary. And as much as it pains me to see so many two-story houses in there, it makes sense to me on a number of levels. And I throw my, I won't say ambivalent support, but there certainly are a lot of questions. There are certainly a lot of things I would like to see back there, and I understand the neighborhood's frustration, because in my own neighborhood that happened a few years ago. And guess what? These people became friends. They became part of the community, and we became part of their world. We kind of grew up together. We went through the same thing. Two-story houses that were much larger than where we lived, and we thought at first we were just being run out and they were going to raise the whole neighborhood and put in something that we couldn't get along with, or put in, who knows what. But I think this, if you ask me about a lot of development, I'm going to ask myself whether it's going to make sense. Is it going to make sense for Livermore? I think it's been shown that it will. I think a lot of I understand the emotions that go into a neighborhood changing, but compression you aren't going to escape it unless you move to Plumas County. You're just not going to get away from it. If you're living in a city, you have to deal with those mandates and restrictions that being in a city makes you have to consider. So I'll shut up now.
Councilmember Carling?
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the passion that we've heard tonight, and on both sides. And I also appreciate all the emails that we have collectively received over the last couple of weeks. It's been both, I guess, confounding in terms of how I was going to reach a decision on this, but also substantiates my view that people care about this community and care a lot about this community and want the best for their children and their families and for the future people in this community. I'm also very impressed with the process and the way that folks have been engaged over time, not only with the school district, but also with the developer once William Lyon Homes was identified. I've also been very impressed with the developer's willingness to work with the homeowners and listen to their criticisms and concerns, and making some changes that enable them to both to address those concerns, but also keeping in mind that they're a company that wants actually to make a profit and to create jobs for people in this community. So I'm in favor of the project and look forward to supporting the resolution.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Warner.
Well, I think I've tried to listen pretty carefully on both sides of this, but I think the bottom line is that the area has been surplus by the school district. The clock is ticking. There would be fines if it didn't happen. I think we've heard that the Park District passed on that, so Park is not a viable option. So it strikes me that given the situation, the deterioration and everything else that's going on, that the area does need to be rezoned residential. What I'm not sure of at this point, and maybe we'll have more discussion, is to what extent are all of the surrounding community concerns properly mitigated? I understand that going to pure two-story and that size maximizes the value, and then that has good things for the school district. But at the moment, and as I say, subject to further discussion, now that I think it'll be clear after tonight that this will get rezoned for residential. Have we really gone through and determined that the overall community is in favor of this particular residential project? So, for instance, you do hear about the privacy concerns on the perimeter. It looks like a lot of effort was gone through to mitigate it. So I It seems reasonable, but I'm frankly not sure that that's where, now that everybody can focus on that, is that adequate? And then I have another question here. I think it's my understanding for a development of this size, you would not normally have a tot lot or equivalent in it. Is that correct?
So, no, a tot lot is not required, especially for conventional zoning. Our zoning code doesn't identify any tot lot or a small park requirement. Sometimes we see with planned developments where they request deviations from standard zoning, they provide an amenity. And so sometimes a tot lot will be an amenity to deviate from standard zoning, but one is not required in this case.
Okay, so it seems there is concern, and I'm not completely convinced that everything has been adequately mitigated, but it seems close. So I'm not sure at this point whether it would need to go back to the Planning Commission for one more shot to make sure that we've finally got it. I would be open to that. I'm also open to, depending on further conversation here, to go with approval as is.
Vice Mayor Spadowski? Sure, thank you. First, I'd like to also thank staff and the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission for their work and all their comments. It's always a help to get that review. I don't necessarily disagree with the conversion to residential, but in my mind it needs to be the right residential project. When approving a higher density site, I usually look for some type of transition between land uses. Either, there might be commercial on one end or even a park. But this site is surrounded by urban medium residential, and the request is to rezone it to urban medium high. I feel that there are plenty of sites in town that are appropriate for higher densities, but there are very few sites in town where a lower density would be warranted, and I think this is one of them. Just looking at the neighborhood, measuring a rough area equivalent to the size directly to the east of this proposed project, you can, there are approximately 40 units on the same acreage immediately east of this site. So pushing it to 54 units, I think, is pushing it in my mind. I think that if you went for a lower density, perhaps we can get a better street layout. I'm not a big fan of the loop layout in the middle of an urban medium residential area. I'd prefer the street widths to match. If you can do that, if not, then matching the surrounding neighborhoods, maybe with dual courts. I'm just not, I don't like sacrificing any parking spaces, and I know it meets some of our minimum standards, but we all know, and as some people commented it tonight, sorry, it's getting late, that typically garages, you can't guarantee that that's always going to be 2 parking stalls used. I also think that there is a demand for new single-story homes in Livermore. Every time we approve a development with new single-story homes, those single-story homes are typically, at least in my experience, 3 years on Planning Commission and now 2 years on the council, those single-story homes are sold via a lottery. There are so many people wanting to buy a single-story new home, and I know this sounds, a little bit counterintuitive, but a lot of retirees want to buy a brand new single-story home so they just don't have to deal with any issues. So, and the opportunity for new single-story homes, that's another potential that's few and far between in the city. I'd like to point out Morning Glory Circle in Springtown. That was something I believe I saw in the Planning Commission, and it was later approved by the council. That's a very good example of infill development that matches existing surrounding neighborhood densities. So at this point, the only and I don't disagree with the surplusing of the site, and I do believe it's the school district's job to provide adequate facilities for our students, so I'm not going to disagree with anything that they've said. But I do think that rezoning or actually changing our general plan designation to an urban medium high is just a little bit too high. I could see possibly supporting an urban medium residential use, but that's with the caveat of anytime that we rezone property in town for a specific use, I'd like to see that plan prior to rezoning the land. And I also like to ensure that we develop the necessary conditions where the rezoning of that land is conditioned to that project. Because I've seen in other communities where something is rezoned based on a project, that project goes away, now you're stuck with the zoning, and you could have a completely different project come in, and they already have the existing rights to build based on that zoning. So with that, I do think it warrants a kickback to the Planning Commission, hopefully with some of the concerns addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Spadowski. Yes, this has been once again, a very contentious issue. There's been a lot of folks on both sides of it, and of course, there's been a lot of discussion that the City Council should be acting as the school board, and that's not what we do. When you start talking about the operation of the schools, the siting of the schools, that's most appropriately under the purview of the school district. That's not a function of the City Council, as the city manager pointed out. I agree with one of the points that the vice mayor had, that I know that in my neighborhood, the single-story houses go first. In fact, they never really go on the market. This is coming soon, and then it's gone. So I know that there has been sensitivity about having the two-story houses next to the single-story houses, and I appreciate that. And it's difficult, as Councilmember Coomer pointed out. We're trying to find something that's going to work for the school district, work for the community, and it's how do you find that balance? Personally, I could support either of the proposals, reconsidering some of the density and some of the single stories, but on the other hand, that's obviously going to impact what ultimately happens with the school district. So again, we're trying to find a balance here, and how best to accomplish that really is that's the main question here. So with that, I'm going to.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Well, we seem to agree that we'll let the school district decide what's best for the school district, and that's not within our purview. I just wonder what about the Planning Commission? I mean, they already spent, a fair amount of time on this, and I just wonder what would we expect to get back from them that we haven't already received?
Well, hopefully they would take into our comments into consideration from this evening, because the Planning Commission, they have a very specific role. They are focused on land use and site design. So when you give them a slightly higher land use, so that, from a Planning Commissioner standpoint, sure, I can see where that would work. And then they look at the site design as well with the windows and the setbacks. But when it gets to the level, at least in my opinion, of the council, it's our job to take a broader account of some of the public input that we received, and also the overall fit with the neighborhood. So I would hope that the Planning Commission would receive some direction, if we do kick it back to them, from some of the comments that we have tonight about trying to match the densities and the street layouts and the street widths. To me, it's such a significant change that it would warrant kicking it back to them.
But haven't they already seen all that?
They've seen the current proposed plan.
I know they've seen the current proposed plan, but
Right.
but they had public comment as well, right?
Right, and they've had public comment, and under their purview, I can see where they would say that it is appropriate to move it forward to the council. And then our role kicks in as council members to then ultimately decide based on a wider range of criteria than what the Planning Commission is commissioned to
They're
do.
looking for the appropriateness of fitting the general plan.
So may I ask a question that might,
Councilmember Warner.
and it goes back to the staff, and having been on the Planning Commission, I think both Vice Mayor Spadowski and I have had that experience. I don't believe they were asked to weigh in on what the zoning should be, were they?
Well, the general plan and the zoning are issues that the Planning Commission provides a recommendation to the council on, so they did look at those two issues.
Okay.
So that means they went with the whatever the
Well,
designation.
it came to them, and their job is to find the appropriateness to the general plan.
Sure.
And they found that it was appropriate to meet the needs of the general plan.
Okay.
And as you pointed out, they deliberated on this. They took a great deal of effort, and they, along with the Historic Preservation Commission, all returned a unanimous verdict in favor of the development.
Well, just a quick example. As a planning commissioner, I voted in favor of the Sunset development to rezone it into residential units. And that was also while I was running, and I took a lot of heat for that. But that was my role as a planning commissioner. I felt that that was appropriate. And then when I saw it as a council member, I voted the opposite way. And as a role, my role as a council member was to take in a wider consideration of public comment and impact to the community. And I felt at that point, as a planning commissioner, my comments were, okay, it matches, what we are looking for in terms of compatibility with the general plan and appropriate use for the site. I'm glad to kick it to the council for the final decision, because I was very wobbly on that. I tried to keep the blinders on as a planning commissioner, but I kicked it to a city council that I happened to get elected to, so I basically kicked the problem to myself. But then I ended up voting as a council member.
So you got to vote both ways.
Yeah, I voted against myself as a planning commissioner, basically. So, go figure.
So as has been pointed out, we've understood, I think the council agrees that this is no longer going to be a school site, that this site has been surplused, the school district voted unanimously, everyone along the process has voted in favor of this, to move this along, and with that, I'd be willing to entertain a motion.
I'll move to accept the resolution.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Carling. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilmember Coomber. Discussion on the motion. You're reaching for your mic.
Well, I think that given everything I've heard, even though it's a slight delay, I would suggest no on the motion as is and send it back to the Planning Commission.
What would your direction be for the Planning Commission?
To revisit the density and the whether or not there should be single-story homes.
What would be the effect on the proposed project and on the school district if that were to occur?
You'd need to have a representative of the school district respond to your second question. And I'm not exactly certain on the first item there. The question of having single-story homes, the council has previously conditioned that on projects. In other words, to add a single-story plan and place them on a minimum of X number of lots within a subdivision. So you can do that by condition if it is that clear that's what the council wants. If the council wants a more expansive look at the project, that would need much more definition from the council to actually return to the Planning Commission, then it would be appropriate to return to the Planning Commission. You essentially want a different project at that point. So you'd have, indeed, if you wanted to change, street widths, number of lots, general plan designation to perhaps better match. Those are all items that are fundamental redesigns. Adding a single story falls within the ability to add a condition to the project that would return to the Planning Commission, but essentially the project would be approved with that additional condition. So it does depend on what the pleasure of the council is. How fundamental a redesign are you directing the Planning Commission to implement? You have their recommendation in front of you, so you'd need to feed back to them exactly what you're looking for if you wanted to return this to the Planning Commission so they could accomplish your mission for you at that point. If you just want to condition the project to add a slightly different unit type to the mix, that's something you could do as part of an approval through an approval, condition of approval. The actual looking at the details of that would go back to the Planning Commission, but that's after your approval versus a return to them with the project unapproved and redesign it using certain criteria that it's within your discretion to give that direction, but that direction would need to be clear so the Planning Commission could accomplish that for you.
And how long would that process take?
So if you asked for some percentage of the units to be single-story, the developer would obviously need to do some renegotiation with the school district, but if they're able to work that out, they would come back with a revised project proposal. It should be relatively straightforward for the Planning Commission to review. You would be looking at some change to some number of lots, a different house type, the design of that house. I would estimate that you might take 2-3 months to come back to the Planning Commission, somewhere in that range, depending on developer's capacity to make the changes.
The number and type of changes other than that. In other words, if it were more than simply an architectural change, if you really did want the subdivision redesigned. Some of the comments spoke about fundamental redesign of the subdivision versus adding or subtracting a particular unit.
Okay, I'm going to take some personal privilege here and ask the representative from Lyons to speak to this.
Thank you, Mayor Marchand. Again, Scott Roy, Lyons from Lyon Homes, we're the applicant. Just listening to the comments and the discussion back there, I think we could be in a position where if we could get a conditional approval where we could swap out our existing Plan 1, which is a 2-story home. There are 13 of them, which is about 24% of the site, with a single-story. So again, a swap out with the condition that we work with staff to develop a single-story, 13 units on the site, and we could spread those around the perimeter of the project. We'd be willing to work with staff if we get that approval.
And how much time would you need to do that?
Well, again, we'd work immediately with staff. Again, I think from ideal, we'd appreciate a conditional approval from council this evening, and then we'd work with staff to develop that plan. We would still fit with, again, our proposal is we are not asking for deviations or anything from the zoning code. We would maintain that proposal with a single-story home, again, swapping out our current Plan 1, there's 13 of those units, with 13 one-story plans that fit the zoning code. And we'd work immediately with staff. I mean, we've got our architects here. We'd get to work right away. Again, delay on the school district. I can't speak to their exact delay, but they're worried about fines.
Okay,
so I would ask that would be something that we work with staff on for just the approval of staff level to move forward, and they would ensure that 13 of those units are one-story homes.
Okay, and would you be able, there was earlier talk about reciting the plaque from the school. Would we need to condition that, or?
Sure, we're happy. Again, and it's not reciting the existing plaque. Again, I think we've given it the opportunity for the Heritage Guild. I know the Heritage Guild was out there on Friday. They may or may not have taken it from there. But again, some small plaque on landscape lot A. Yeah, recognizing that this was the Sonoma school site from years to years. And again, we would design that with staff, and we would, build it concurrent with that landscape lot A.
Okay, well, very good. Well, thank you for volunteering to work with staff, because one of the major concerns was the massing and the juxtaposition of the singles of the 2 stories next to the single stories. So, okay, very good. Well, thank you very much for the clarification.
Can I go? So, once we dispense with the motion that we've got, I would move to do what he just described.
Okay.
Can I ask him another? Scott, can I ask you a question though? I mean, I think that's a wonderful suggestion that you made, but let's be clear. I mean, are you going to change the square footage of the homes then? Because you're going to, one of the reasons that you built or designed all 2 stories was so the footprint would be smaller and you wouldn't encroach on property lines as closely as you will now. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. That's why we designed the 2-story, one of the reasons why we designed the 2-story homes originally. There's a potential that those 1-story footprints will be a little bit larger, but again, we're proposing that this single-story home, again, I think listening to the council, hearing some feedback real time from you, from council members. We will design that single-story home to fit within the exact zoning code. And again, just maybe to address your question exactly, there is a 40% lot coverage maximum within the RL zoning code that, again, will comply with and limits the size of that home. So it will be a smaller square footage home than we are currently proposing.
Okay,
Not sure if
thanks.
that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Mr. City Attorney, would I take that as an amending motion, or could that be part of the original?
Well, it could be an amending motion. You could withdraw the current motion that's on the floor and have a new motion. There's a lot of ways you can approach this right now.
So I'll
Do you
withdraw.
want to make that an amending motion?
No, why don't I just withdraw?
Withdraw and then restate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So withdraw the motion, and we'll accept the resolution with the proviso that they're going to look at reducing the number from 54 to 41, I guess, two-story with 13 one-story homes on the lots.
And working with staff to
Working with
juxtapose
staff
as
to
appropriately.
juxtapose as appropriate, right.
Okay. Is there another second?
Second.
Okay, you'll second that again.
Discussion?
Any discussion on that motion?
Sure. I just want to, again, I think, and I appreciate the willingness to change on the fly. I know that's not easy, down to single-story homes. That's a third of my concerns addressed. I still have concerns about the densities, and I don't think we've sufficiently addressed that. This is a permanent change, and although we are staying within existing surrounding zoning, we're asking for a general plan amendment to insert a higher density surrounded by a lower density neighborhood. That's a very tough decision for me to make, and one that I cannot support. For the reasons that I stated earlier, I'm not going to restate them, but I just think it would be a better fit with fewer units and a different street layout, similar to the surrounding neighborhoods.
Okay, very good, thank you. Any other discussion, any comments? Councilman Bakun?
Well, one of the aspects that I wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to interfere, reducing the number of two-story houses, would it interfere with the affordability component, which was one of the reasons I supported?
Nope, there will still be, again, 54 units. 8 of those units of the Plan 1s will be, for low-income housing. Again, 4 moderate and 4 low, so that does not change, just the size of the home will change.
I just wanted to see more opportunities for people who work in Livermore to live in Livermore and be able to afford to live there.
Yep.
All right. Very good, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The motion passes 4-1 with Vice Mayor Spadovsky voting no, the rest affirmative. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for your many emails, for your comments, your calls, your letters. Thank you. I certainly appreciate your passion, and
Honorable
the council
Mayor.
appreciates your
Honorable Mayor,
comments. Thank you.
just a
Yes.
quick item. We're clarifying that the condition actually is to return to staff for the
Yes.
final. Very
Yes.
good. Thank you. And that the units are distributed around the perimeter, and there are 13 of them.
Yes, and juxtaposed single story to single story.
Yeah. And this was based on the Planning Commission and staff's recommendation as amended by what we just talked about.
Yes.
Very good.
How does he summarize what we've been thinking? How does he always...
Just make sure I'm in the right place. Okay, 6.01, matters for consideration. This is regarding an amendment to the downtown specific plan on residential height limits. Steve Stewart, our planning manager.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Back in October, the council directed staff to return with a discussion for an interim height limit reduction for residential projects in the downtown specific plan area. The interim measure would limit the maximum height of residential projects to 3 stories until the city conducts additional community outreach and receives feedback regarding development of the Livermore Village and Hotel Catalyst sites. Generally, the maximum height in all of the specific plan land use districts is 3 stories and 45 feet. However, there are exceptions for some specific sites and specific projects. For example, the downtown core provided exceptions for the Bankhead Theater for up to 75 feet tall, and the Livermore Cinema and First Street Retail and Railroad Retail in the Golden Triangle, both up to 50 feet tall. At the last council meeting in January, the council also approved a building height exception for the Chestnut Square project. This height exception allowed 4 stories and 45 feet, where 3 stories and 45 feet were the height limit. And that exception was approved under the city and state's density bonus law and did not require a specific plan amendment. The specific plan also includes height exceptions for both the growth and city-owned catalyst sites within the downtown core. They're both very similar. The site maximum height is up to 4 floors and 55 feet, provided that the 4th floor does not extend for more than 60% of the street frontage on Railroad Avenue, L Street, and M Street. And then adjacent to First Street, the maximum height shall be limited to 3 floors and 45 feet. Staff has been approached by a developer regarding the growth catalyst site. That developer is pursuing a 3- and 4-story mixed-use projects with residential units above ground floor retail along First Street, and then residential units on the rear portions of the site facing Railroad Avenue. The city has not received a formal application for that project. The similar exception for the city-owned Livermore Village site, catalyst sites, those may have a maximum height up to 4 floors and 55 feet, provided that the 4th floor does not extend more than 60% of the frontage along L Street, Railroad Avenue, and Livermore Avenue. And then it should be noted that the city does have complete control over those sites since the city does own those. And so the council can specify limits of acceptable project proposals, including height limitations that are more restrictive than the specific plan. A reduction in building height does have the potential to affect the viability of and reduce overall density, and therefore impact some of the viability of certain projects. Staff has done some analysis, and both the growth and Livermore Village site could support a 3-story height limit that would still allow the development at the lower end of the 30 to 55 unit per acre density range that's established in the specific plan. Modifying the height limits for residential development projects would require a specific plan amendment. That process takes about 3 to 6 months, including the technical analysis, environmental review, and required hearings. And that concludes my presentation. We are recommending that you do provide direction regarding a city-initiated specific plan amendment to establish an interim height limit reduction for residential projects. I'm happy to take questions.
Questions at this point? Questions? Okay. Good presentation. No questions. Okay, I've got probably half a dozen cards here, a little better. Okay, I'll open the public hearing or the public comment period. David Eichler, Jeff Caskey, Richard Ryan. Mr. Eichler.
Try and get this to work. Here we go. Good evening, Mayor, council members, city staff, and members of the public. My name is David Eichler, and I run the Northern California development effort for Legacy Partners. Legacy Partners is based in Foster City, California, and over its 46-year history, we have developed approximately 72,000 apartments, so we're pretty good at the business of multifamily housing. Legacy Partners started working with the owners of the Groth site, Catalyst site in 2015. We've been in to see Steve and Paul numerous times regarding the development of that site. As in any endeavor, there are many factors that go into developing multifamily housing. Communities need to have favorable zoning and a clear path to perfect the approvals under that zoning. You need to have a willingness of the city staff and elected officials. Market conditions for the product have to be favorable, and you have to have the ability to attract the necessary financing. Financing, of course, is based on the economic requirements of the equity and debt lenders, which often change based on market conditions and the overall economy. Our initial efforts in developing the Growth Catalyst site focused on understanding the history of the site as it was impacted environmentally by the prior uses. I thought I was going to speak behind Michael, so as you'll hear from Michael, those uses included heavy rail tracks and operations, warehouses, an auto dealership with repair bays, and a paint shop. During our work over the past 2 years, Legacy contacted the Regional Water Quality Control Board, as the regional board is the local agency that would oversee the environmental cleanup of the site. We were able to get the board to re-engage in the site's environmental characterizations. In fact, the regional board moved the site to the priority list because Legacy, with the support of city staff, argued that the city had a clear approval process in the downtown specific plan, and that the approval process and the development of the site was going to move forward sooner rather than later. As our environmental research and studies evolved, we had our architect produce layouts and design studies that met the zoning and design criteria of the downtown core in the downtown specific plan. We shared those studies with the city staff and then refined the studies to a point where we could begin to add the definition needed to prepare a planning board submittal package. That submittal package would move the approval process of the Growth Catalyst site forward. Besides the downtown specific plan requirements, a very large driver in those architectural studies was the cleanup of the environmental conditions and the cost of that cleanup. The Growth Catalyst site is approximately 4.8 acres. It's a pretty big site. The cleanup effort centers on the removal of approximately 50,000 yards of dirt and other items to various landfill locations in the area. The cleanup process and removal of that quantity of dirt is extremely costly. For development to be able to absorb this cost, it needs an order of magnitude density in terms of unit count. The current guidelines and zoning requirements in the downtown specific plan allow for the density that is needed to accomplish the cleanup and therefore the development of the important catalyst site. However, an interim height limit reduction would severely impact, if not completely halt the application and the approval process of the Groth site. A permanent height limit reduction could jeopardize the development of the site altogether, and along with it, the environmental cleanup and the clear goals stated in the downtown specific plan. The downtown specific plan visioning process started almost 16 years ago in May of 2001. The city council, city staff, consultants in their studies, along with the involved public input process, took almost 3 years to complete and adopt in 2004. The downtown specific plan was adopted 13 years ago. It's ironic and maybe a little coincidental that the 13-year anniversary of the specific plan was last Thursday, February 9th. I'm not a resident of Livermore, and I do not have it, but I do have a team member here who is a 30-year resident of Livermore.
Mr. Eichler, if you could wind up, please.
Just about finished.
Thank you.
I do not want to pretend that I know the ins and outs of the city or that I'm an expert in the specific plan. I'm not a planner. That said, the city of Livermore has a 14-step detailed strategy in the specific plan to achieve the goals that were set out after those 4 years of work. Several of those goals have been met and achieved and achieved the intended success the city wanted. I do want to point out that the 14 items that still need, two of the 14 items that still need to come to fruition. Strategy number 2, maximize the investment in new housing construction throughout the plan area.
Mr. Eichler, if you could please wind up.
Okay. Strategy 2, maximize new housing in the construction in the plan area. And 14, focus immediate attention on the short-term beneficial sites of the Lucky site, the Livermore Valley Center, and the Groth site. Therefore, I ask the council on behalf of the owners of the development to carefully consider the impact of a moratorium or an interim moratorium on the height limit.
Just a quick question, if I may. How many cubic feet did you say needed to be removed from the site?
50,000.
50,000
cubic yards.
Okay, thank you.
1,000 yards, 50,000.
50,000.
Yards.
Right, 50,000 cubic yards,
So,
yeah.
can I ask a question then?
Certainly.
So I've got a question.
Sure.
So you mentioned that the prior uses and the environmental impact has made this site problematic. So in terms of the price of the land, so you mean there's another option here? I mean, you can either build higher and get the profit that way, or the price of the land is less. So what is the fraction of the price of the land that this cleanup represents?
Almost half.
Okay. So the question is, who bears that? The owner of the defective land or the community?
Correct. Although, as you heard tonight, I think that you can address the height limit discussion on the Lucky site in a different manner than revisiting the specific plan and changing the height limit across the whole downtown core.
Thank you, Mr. Eichler.
Thank you.
Jeff Caskey, Richard Ryan, Michael Bordoni.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. I'm honored actually to read a statement from Dr. Lee Yonker, who couldn't be here this evening and speaks rather more eloquently than I do, so here's his statement. Thank you for considering an interim limit on residential building heights in downtown Livermore. It is clear from the discussion over the last many months that the community is deeply concerned about dense structures looming over the downtown. It was certainly a major factor in the strong opposition to the Lennar downtown proposal. You are wise to have this limitation clearly in mind as the city moves forward to complete the development of the Lucky site and also plans the residential development around the city center to meet demand and support the widely supported urban growth boundary. With that in mind, careful consideration needs to be given to how to apply building height constraints within the confines of the 8-acre Lucky site. Blending open space, a quality hotel, parking, and a variety of mixed-use residential, retail, restaurant, and office structures into a creative, inspiring, forward-looking, achievable, and sustainable plan is indeed a challenge. Many ideas have come out, some of which depend on having a residential element, perhaps set back from view and or built above residential and office space, that could require some partial 4 stories. I expect many more ideas will surface in the upcoming workshops and discussions. I would encourage you to retain the flexibility to consider the full range of ideas that surface for the Lucky site in the coming weeks and months. When I spoke to Lee also, I wanted to mention that he supports a solution that places limits on the, or considers limits on the private city center property where the city will have less control over the final result of the project. That's Lee's statement. I want to reinforce that, at least for the city site, it's a city-owned site, so you will have all the opportunity to place the restrictions that you're interested in. Some of the ideas that Lee didn't mention, for instance, if there were partially submerged parking, you could end up with 3.5 stories, and then, well, how do you count that stuff? Also, the notion of setting back a partial 4th floor might be something that you're considering. So I think that you still can consider what you want to do with the growth site, but I think that you want to leave your options open, or at least Lee is recommending, and I certainly agree with his thoughts, that you leave open your options for the 8-acre site. Thank you very much.
So I've got a question. It wasn't clear. Did you say you're indifferent as to what happens on the Growth Brothers site?
So Lee supports a solution that places limitation on private city center property where the city will have less control over the final project.
What kind of limitation?
He wasn't specific. I'm presuming that he was talking about the height limit that you're talking about tonight.
So you're presuming that his statement says he's supporting the 3-story limit on the Growth Brothers site?
On the Growth Brothers site, correct. Okay. Right. I'm sorry, it was my editing. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Ryan, Michael Bordoni, Dale Kay. Don't break it.
Yeah, I'll try not to. I appreciate the impetus behind
limiting the heights on buildings in the downtown, but I would urge you not to do it. I think there's so many other variables in the planning for both the Lucky site and the Groth Brothers site, and I'm glad that you're considering these things kind of together, that I would hate to see you limit the options available by limiting the height, because there's just so many other aspects involved that I'd like to see what else might come through the RFP process and so forth. So I would urge you not to put a height limit on it at this time, and see what comes in. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Michael Bordoni, Dale Kay, Gene King.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff, and members of the public. My name is Michael Bordoni, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of my family, part owner since 2007 of a downtown-specific plan catalyst site, namely the Groth Brothers Chevrolet dealership land. A short-term memorandum and/or specific plan amendment limiting the height for this catalyst property would cripple the prospects for its redevelopment, as David has mentioned. Much has been said in David's speech about the history of this site and the issues that come with that. And countless, uses aside from the ones that he's mentioned have been there over the last century and a half. Future development of the site depends in large part on a developer, willing and able to address some of those concerns. And to address the question that Councilmember Warner had about, this being perhaps a transfer, from the landowner to council, that is not the case. We have, been willing to, in our negotiations with Legacy and others, accept a substantial discount on the purchase price, and that is money that's held in escrow, for the remediation of environmental expenses. What David refers to, though, is something that's essentially open-ended. Certain things going in that you have to remove these 50,000 cubic yards of dirt, but you don't know what goes beyond there. And so, there's a certain level of uncertainty that he will always have as developer to that. Our family's been working for the last 3-4 years to find a developer willing to tackle these challenges. We're confident in the work that David and his team have put together in working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board in getting this site back on the priority list to address some of the issues that it has. And I think it's a site that the cleanup is a manageable task, and it's something that can be done and be done well, and have a site long term that does not have the impacts that it has currently. However, changes to the specific plan, particularly to the specified height limits, would really jeopardize the future viability of the site. And so I ask you and encourage you to consider the negative impacts that such a height moratorium would have on the viability of the Groth site, and maintain the specific plan in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bordoni. Let's go with Dale Kay, Gene King, William Dunlop.
Good evening again. Dale Kay with Innovation Tri-Valley, and I think this city has done an amazing job in branding itself as an innovation hub with a strong arts and culture that many people are very envious of. That is what people are looking for. It's a wonderful combination. I think to restrict people who are coming in, and there are a lot of people very interested in Livermore because of those things, to restrict them in any way and their imagination when they're building something is a mistake. As you know, Innovation Tri-Valley, you're probably tired of hearing this, but we're very passionate about housing as well. Workforce housing, at this point, to make it just so flatten it and take that off of the plan that was already existent, seemed to be a little bit regressive in the city. And I've heard many of you say this right up here tonight, that we need that housing. So I urge you not to amend the plan and keep the height. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kay. Gene King, William Dunlop, Jason Bezos.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. I'm Jean King. I'm speaking for myself and not speaking for any group or organization. I'm not sure that I agree with a 3-story limit on residential. First, I have a question. I understand this applies to residential buildings only. If the structure is mixed use with retail, office, and restaurant on one or more floors and residential on the top floors, then is the building limited to a total of 3 stories, or is the residential part limited to 3 stories? Okay, that's my question. I was very opposed to the 5-story massive development proposed by Lennar for our downtown block. It was too high, too dense, and lacked the public open space. There have been many complaints about the development on the east side of First Street by the railroad overpass. The 3-story limit does not make it attractive. It is the overall development. Sometimes individual components can be okay, but the total development design turns out to be unacceptable. The bankhead is tall, but it has open space plaza to set it off. It isn't just jammed into that space. Every time I go downtown, I pass St. Michael's Church, which has a tall component but beautiful architecture and is set off with open space around it. I'm not advocating for another theater or a church downtown. I'm just trying to say that the height of a residential building is one of many considerations. It should be considered in the context of the whole development. A taller building height can be acceptable if it has enough surrounding open space and the right architecture. Maybe a couple of penthouse units on a small part of a 4th floor would work. Maybe something that I cannot even contemplate. I find it hard, personally, to visualize from a 2-dimensional drawing and wish that before there is a final vote on any project, that there would be a 3D display of the project. So what I'm saying is that I want a wonderful downtown, but I'm not sure that the 3-story limit on residential is the best way to go. It is evident from earlier discussion this evening that developers can make changes to bring development that the city and the citizens want. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. William Dunlop, Jason Bezos.
Mayor and City Council members, I'm Bill Dunlop, and I've been very interested in the development of the downtown for a number of years now. And I think you considering a 3-story height restriction out of concern for residents' strong objection to the Lennar downtown proposal, the community group also opposed the Lennar plan, a plan that provided for housing up to 4 stories in height. The development on the Gross Brothers property west of LC could also be a concern. I'm assuming that the suggested height restriction would prevent the city from having to approve a 4-story residential unit that might be proposed there. However, the city owns the Lucky site, so a developer cannot force a 4-story project without your say-so. I think it's important to exclude the Lucky site from any 4-story residential constraint, especially before the community workshops happen. You would be imposing restraints on the creative ideas that otherwise might be proposed. Also, if the residential unit count in this 8-acre proposal were too low, a developer might not be able to make the project pencil out for him. Then it might not move forward with what would otherwise be desirable aspects of the plan. I think allowing the community to provide their innovative ideas at the workshops is crucial before a decision is made on this issue. Please don't introduce restrictions that needlessly limit anyone's vision of an inspiring downtown center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunlop. Jason Bezos.
Hi, good evening. Continuing with the theme about leaving options open. I think, speaking of the Catalyst site, we now know that there's pretty much a lot of discretion the city has for that. And I do think it's good to leave the options open, see what comes, and you can always reject them within certain limits. I can't really speak for the other sites. The Growth Brothers are not publicly owned. But I do say that a lot of people forget in the old days there were giant hay warehouses in downtown Livermore, giant structures. There's a nice aerial photo that I put in one of the Livermore Heritage Guild issues from 1990. 1919 that gives you an idea how large these were. So historically, we just have to keep things in mind about our vision of what downtown is different from what it was 100 years ago, and just keep options open. But the other thing I do want to emphasize today is I was very troubled, again, with the depot. There was a lot of misinformation that was put out, a lot of pressure, strong-arm tactics that were going on around October of 2004. I included the email in my last packet, but Historic Preservation Commissioner Jeff...
Can I ask for a point of order?
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
You're off topic.
No, I am on topic, sir.
You're talking about the depot, sir.
I'm talking about the depot because the email I'm
We're talking
referring
about
to,
the height
I am
limit.
referring to, and I will read it
This is
right
the
here.
height limit.
I
This
will
has
read
nothing
it.
to do with
I
the
will
depot.
read it right into the record. Please let me continue.
He is speaking about the Catalyst site.
But in regards to height limits, I would agree with
Well, we will
Councilman
see how far where he goes with this.
Okay, I want the clock stopped. I really believe my First Amendment rights in this public forum are being interfered with here.
Wait, Mr. Bezos, please continue your
My clock is still running here. Okay, I'm gonna read right from this email that came from Historic Preservation Commissioner
please keep
Jeff
your comments
Caskey.
to the height limit.
Yes,
Would you
and he was
please?
saying in the strong arm tactics, was saying there that he's talking about the options for the city and the Heritage Guild and trying pressuring before the vote came to the board, saying, talking with the developer and saying, you know, the developer will be pitching the council very hard in design that fits the classic definition of core infill, starting at low 2- and 3-story buildings along the street, moving to 3- and 4-story in the core. And it goes on about the height limits. And basically he was saying the depot will sit in a bunch of tall buildings. This has to do with the height limit. And then he finally came down to this bottom line. This is what bothers me. He said, the most likely result out of all this, this is a quote, the most likely result is that the developer agrees to sell the depot for $1, and we, meaning the Heritage Guild, have 2 months to acquire a site to install it and move it. Developer might contribute some money, but we wouldn't have a site. Basically, it's getting down to saying there was high density was driving anything. The city would basically sell the depot for $1 and force the Heritage Guild to pay for it because there were the tall buildings, and the developer would require, the city would require tall buildings on the site, meaning it wasn't viable to keep the depot there. There never was a study to keep the depot on its site, and part of this in the background was all this about the height limits. And it was not accurate information that was being put out to the public, and this was against the political backdrop with council elections coming at the time, major contributions to a major political action committee within a week or so of this.
Okay, now you're moving away again from the. This is specifically considering the height limit, whether or not the city council will vote to establish a 3-story limit on the downtown Catalyst site development. That's what we're talking about here. Again, you've departed a little bit, talking about the depot being lost in 3- and 4-story buildings, but you've made your point.
Yes, and the point is the options, the accurate information needs to go to the public. The city has options. This is different than a private developer doing things, and I just do not like the misinformation that has gone out there by people who are officials of the city. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments, Mr. Bezos.
And can I just make one quick comment, Mr. Bezos? We're just asking to stay on topic, and if, in our opinion, that you're not on topic, we're just calling for the point of order to make sure that that happens. And it is nothing against what you're saying, and there have been many times where you've been allowed to go overtime and also submit cards from the audience and speak out of turn in the audience. So we're just trying to keep it on track, and when we think, sorry with the depot to use the track term, but if we think that you're going off track, then it's our responsibility to make sure that at least in our mind everything is related to the topic. So thank you for allowing us to call that point of order and to make sure that everything was on topic.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much, one and all. All right, so with that, that's the last of the cards I have.
Don, my card. You don't have a card. I filled one out.
I do not have a card.
When I entered this evening, I filled one out for this item.
6.02?
01.
Or 6.01, yes. Okay, I do not have a card for 6.01 from you. However, if you will please...
I'll fill one out.
We'll make a note of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Dawn Argula, CEO of the Livermore Valley Chamber of Commerce.
The Chamber does not support amending the downtown-specific plan for residential height limits. We urge the utmost caution by the City Council before adding any more restrictions to this specific plan. The plan already establishes height limits for residential. Adding more restrictions reduces the city's flexibility in the future development of the downtown. And with the existing plan, the city retains control and can still dictate the height of future residential development. Do not tie your hands with this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. There was a question that came out of this. Ms. King asked if a building is mixed use and it's got one-story one-story retail on the bottom, and it has 2 stories on top. Is that 2 stories of residential, 3 stories? Is it a 3-story building, or 3 stories of residential? Is it a 4-story building?
That is a great question.
I know what I'm thinking.
The technician in me is intrigued at figuring that out. But just wanted to point your attention to the specific plan language for the growth site lends a little bit of clarity on that, in that the height limit along First Street is limited to 3 stories or 45 feet. That's a mixed-use product with a ground floor retail on the bottom, so you could have 1 or 2 stories of residential on top. The rest of the sites, and then, of course, with the city-owned sites on the 8.18 acres between the two, those are already developed with businesses along First Street. So the council would need to provide some direction on, whether or not that's how you would account for the stories and height product. I mean, I think the intent of the interim ordinance is to limit the overall height, and typically that's would be 3 floors and 45 feet, as you find in the district. If you wanted to change that, you would need to provide some direction.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the comment period is closed. I'm going to bring it back to the council. We'll start on this side. Councilmember Warner.
Yeah, I might as well start since I'm the one who instigated the discussion.
It's your fault.
Yeah, it's my fault. And actually, I want to say a few things, because why did I instigate this discussion? And I think we just saw it on the previous plan for the infill on the Sonoma school. We get to a point where, did we really think this through and get the community input? So the purpose that I had for doing this was to call the question early so that when the plans come in, we don't get into a buzzsaw. Now, I think what I've also observed, and I think it's good. Remember, I'm always concerned about the community coming together. The key, advocates on both sides of the issue on the previous downtown specific plan both came in here and said, don't do it. So I think that's interesting, right? Now, and I will say, that's hopeful sign. I think that one did say, well, don't do it to the area we want to touch, but you can do it to the other one. So that's not completely hopeful. So, but nevertheless, it looks like the major, powers that be on this thing, or the people who want to weigh in on it, are coming together. So I think that's good. The other thing I'd want to point out is that the current downtown specific plan, which we just mentioned was approved 13 years ago, was based on 2 major assumptions which no longer hold. 1, that we would have a 2,000-seat regional theater, and 2, we would have BART coming downtown. Neither of those are true any longer. So therefore, and we also saw what happened when we went out, consistent with the downtown specific plan, but at half the housing that plan said, we got into a political firestorm, right? And we got into a whole bunch of stuff that I don't think was particularly productive. So the purpose that I've got here is, let's get this figured out before we go too much further. So I think that we, in one way or another, we can leave it alone as recommended here, but I really think we've got to figure out a process for getting the true community view as to what we want to do down there. We've got lots of people that assume the mantle of the community and weigh in, but I would like to know how we get that. And I think this is just one component of what we're going to be doing in downtown. And so I'd like to get the question called and we get the input. So what we're also talking about is not tonight making the decision. We're simply saying start the process to have it run through the Planning Commission to get it totally vetted, is my understanding. So what I'm a strong advocate is, we've already kind of called the question, we've had people weigh in on it, we kind of see where both sides are coming in, but now this is a perfect opportunity in my mind to really get a sense of the community. And so I would like to propose that we get this particular height limit question for residential resolved, and we can have the nuances, because I think that was just pointed out, keeping it at 3-story limit along First Street. But what do we really want to do? And do we want to have the do we have the 3-story on the street level with 4 in between? I don't know that the downtown specific plan is completely clear on that, but I don't know. So, but that's my little 2 cents on why I think this was important to call, because I really don't want to go down this path and we get a good proposal on the Growth Brothers site, and then all of the, then it all starts hitting the fan again. So let's get this figured out well in advance. But that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember, Vice Mayor Spadovsky?
Sure. I agree with engaging the public in this conversation. I just don't necessarily know if this is the right tool to do so. When we've been discussing this in the past, we always talked about an interim. It even says so in the staff report. This would be discuss an interim height limit reduction. But then reading through the steps in the staff report, sure as heck doesn't feel interim. I mean, it feels like it is a permanent change, one that we could grant exceptions to, but it is a significant change to our downtown specific plan. I think we have, what happened with people becoming concerned over the 4-story heights and 5-story heights. I think there is more than a bit of public education that we need to engage in. I'm not so concerned about the height limits. Let me put it this way. I think the setbacks are more of an issue than the potential for tiered height limits going towards the center of a project. I think that when this became a topic during the last election, people were envisioning 4 and 5 stories right up against the sidewalk on any given street. There are projects like that going up in the Tri-Valley right now, and I don't imagine ever approving a development that would have 4 or 5 stories tall with no setback to the sidewalk. I mean, that's you're getting that Star Wars Canyon Run feel with that. So I'm not sure that this is the appropriate tool. I was going to talk about unintended consequences to passing this, but I think we've heard of many of the consequences this evening, specifically related to the Growth Brothers Catalyst site. That question about the the retail and how we deal with that. I think that there is a strong interest in the community of having more retail along First Street. And if we do have residential above retail, I would be interested in seeing that project. I'm also vastly concerned about the issues with that site. As somebody who has written annual reports and worked with the regional board for 10 years, I know what you have to go through to mitigate sites. It is very tough on staff, it is very tough on the developers, and it's tough on the regional board staff because they are tasked with detecting and removing these contaminants. And it is I'm glad you appeared tonight before us to say that, because I wanted to bring it up, but I wasn't sure, what the status was, and I didn't want to affect anyone's plan on mitigating this. I mean, that's 50,000 cubic yards. That's a lot of dirt. And for any project to succeed, I think we need to take all those considerations into account. So I'd be interested in moving forward with hearing about that project, and I don't want to constrain it in any way at this point. If the heights are unacceptable to the residents, that will come out during the planning process. And in regards to the catalyst site, as many of the public speakers said tonight, we own it, we control it. It's up to our discretion to do with whatever we think the public feels acceptable. So interim measures I would entertain. This doesn't feel interim to me, so I can't see moving forward with it.
Okay, gentlemen, it's 10:30, so we're continue to move on ahead here and work our way up to 11.
Yes, sir. So you 10:30, you're canvassing the council. You only have one other item beyond this. Your rules state that you do not take an item after 11, though. So
Okay,
you've got about a half hour.
Keep on slogging on. Okay, great. Councilmember Carling.
Yeah, I think this is unnecessary. I think we should keep our options open. I agree with Stephen. I found a little worrisome that it would take 3 to 6 months to amend the plan. So that, again, like Stephen suggested, that doesn't seem interim to me. That seems like we're diverting staff time unnecessarily when we should be getting on with workshops and getting the community together to figure out what we want the downtown, the Catalyst site, to look like. And I agree that I think some of the concerns with the public with the Lennar plan wasn't just the height, it was also the density, the narrow canyons between some of the buildings and so on and so forth. So I think there's plenty of, I like the way Ms. King stated it, she'd like to see it before she can comment on it. And I would like to see what some of the developers are going to come up with. I think we can have very attractive buildings and for retail and residences that are not going to feel gigantic. So I think this is premature. I don't think we need to amend to have this 3-story limit.
Councilmember Coombr.
Was eloquence at 10:35 at night is not my forte. And we've heard so many good things from the other council members. I'm just going to say I'm simply not going to support an amendment to the downtown specific plan at this time.
It was interesting when Mr. Eichler got up and spoke about the use of this site and the contaminants that were on the site. I brought back to mind I wrote the first resolution about methyl tertiary butyl ether as a fuel oxygenate back a number of years ago. And the regional board contacted me and said, you do realize that you have the largest MTBE plume in the state of California, and it underlies this site. And at that point, the regional board said that they were going to implement a cleanup plan within 100 days. That was in 1996. And the site is still sitting there. It is still not developed. And we're talking about the removal of 50,000 cubic yards. So this is a very problematic site. It is a tricky site. And so I would like to be able to allow to keep our options open on this because we need to move on this. It's been sitting there for a long time. It's time we got something going, and I'm looking forward to having some good projects coming in, but I believe we need to remain a little bit flexible on this. And this came out of a very divisive campaign. The idea was to assure the community that there were going to be workshops and there was going to be an opportunity to talk about the downtown specific plan. And I think the time we're still going to be working on that to see how do we best engage the public. So I want to see what's out there. So I wouldn't want to limit our options.
Yeah, and at this point, and we called the question, we had the conversation, which is what we wanted to do. And of course, what you said with the 50,000 cubic yards, you could have 2 of those stories underground, I guess.
Yeah, the hole's already going to be there.
There you go. So, no, I think this is good, and the only question that came up here is, do we want to wait till the project is proposed in order to revisit, does it look good? And I think I'm okay with that, because I believe that the setbacks and the, will work. But we'll see. But I really wanted to, as I said, flush out what people were going to say about this, and I think that was accomplished. So thank you.
Okay, so at this point, there is no interest in the council to amend the downtown specific plan and just keep it the way it is. Okay, so we don't need a motion. We're good with that. Okay, on to 6.02, the last, second to last item on the calendar. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Moving on to 6.02, which is the direction for design options. They're talking about providing shade for the Shea Plaza during hot weather. Oh, those are very cool. Yeah, that's Laguna Beach.
Yes, it is.
I've been there.
Yeah, so just briefly, Mayor, council members, back in September, council directed staff to return with a work plan for evaluating design options for shade structures and or other modifications to the Shea Plaza in front of the bankhead to make it more hospitable during hot weather. As you know, the Shea Plaza at the bankhead offers space for performances and also serves as a gathering place excuse me, during community events. You also know it can get very hot. Portable tents and canopies are often used to shade artists or performers on the outdoor stage. However, the large amphitheater and surrounding seat walls are typically out in the direct sunlight. The staff is recommending an RFP process to establish excuse me, a short list of qualified design consultants. We would then seek specific projects from that short list. The council review and approval of the initial RFQ, short list of consultants, project-specific RFP, and finalists would provide several opportunities for public input. Typically, the projects would also be subject to the Planning Commission for design review. If the City Council authorizes an RFQ process, it would take about a 6-month period of execution from the council's review of the initial RFQ to the selection of the finalist and design. Administration of the process would require the allocation of staff time for project management and also conducting environmental review, which we would imagine would be done in-house, not being too complicated on the environmental review side, that is. The city's 2-year budget does not currently include any appropriations for the design and construction of shade structures or other features. The staff report does contemplate an allocation to $550,000. However, staff could return to the council with the refined costs for consideration before adoption of the budget. So there are a variety of options available for providing shade, and as the mayor pointed out, these are all from the Laguna Art Festival grounds. And I do have a call into their facilities supervisor, but don't have any message back from him on cost, how easy are they to take up, put down, and how often are they up. And so those sorts of logistical questions. There are also some more permanent artistic opportunities out there. Again, with probably a wide range of costs and resources to deploy those. And then there's some other options showing some different forms that that shade structures could take. And staff is recommending a consultant because this designing and constructing this type of feature is beyond, or it's not really within the city's scope of core services. So with that ends my report. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, questions from the council? Questions? Vice Mayor?
I'll wait till after.
Okay. Councilmember Warner, questions? Okay, all right. I've got a half dozen cards here or so. Let's open up the public comment period. Jeff Caskey, Scott Kennison, Lynn Seppala.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. I'm Jeff Caskey. Forgot to introduce myself last time. By the way, that's about 2,500 truckloads of dirt, just checking. The shade structure is an idea that certainly we've heard from Dr. Lynn Seppala. He was the one who really was the spearhead to start the Tuesday Tunes that reopened the activities on the Bankhead Plaza. And so I'm really just here to say I think that the Tuesday Tunes was a wonderful idea. We really were able to pull a lot of people into that venue, and the idea of having the opportunity to do that through the summer with some protective shade, I think, is just a great idea to continue to activate that space in a way that is great for bringing Livermore citizens to their downtown. I appreciate the pictures that staff has put up. And probably like you, I'm a little frustrated that something as simple conceptually as a umbrella is going to take 6 months of planning, and I, certainly I work with the city as much as anybody, and understand that that's part of the process. So I would suggest that Dr. Seppala has done some of his own work. He was very interested in this project and has acquired some drawings, and I know you'll hear from him as well. But hopefully some of that could be leveraged into the work that needs to kickstart this process. So thank you very much. I appreciate the council's consideration of this, and I think it's another piece of our great downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Kennison, Lynn Seppala, John Stein.
Mayor Marchand, council members, city staff, I will be very short. Yay. Not quite that short. Every day I overlook the Shea Holmes Plaza, the Bankhead Plaza, and I see on a daily basis what goes on there. On top of the things that we present, we've presented just recently the Barrio Fiesta, the Filipino Heritage Festival, Native American Festival, Art Walk, Evenings on the Green, and the list goes on and on. We are thrilled that this enhancement will truly make the Bankhead Plaza the center of cultural life in downtown Livermore. I think the proposed process is terrific, and I would look forward to helping in any way that I can and making this all a reality. Thank you.
You forgot the Diwali Festival and the Rally for Love. Lynn Seppala, John Stein, and we found Don Argula's card, 6.02.
Do you want to speak?
No, just 602. She had a 602 on 601. Okay.
Good evening, Mayor Marchand, council members, and staff. I've submitted a copy of my remarks. I'm just going to make it much more briefer. I talked with a number of organizations, and the idea began from covering the stage to cover the entire plaza. I went to a consultant to look at a commercially built tensile shade structure, and the consultant said, rather than taking up and down every year, he suggested a 20-year fabric that could withstand the heat, rain, and the wind. So, and a really rough engineering calculation said we could probably do for something like $400,000. Now, that was a year and a half ago, so $550 sounds pretty reasonable. Last October, LCAC participated in the Art Walk from 11 to 5. We did it at the Chamber of Commerce, and it was very cool around with brick building and then full tent. But then I went to the Bankhead Theater, and the plaza was a sea of tent. Maybe some people were cool inside the tent, but the attendees were left to bake in the sun. It was incredibly different. And I realized that by putting this structure, you could double the use in the summer. So I really look forward to staff recommendation for a request for qualification in RFQ, so get all the possible ideas and then choose among them and then choose a project to go forward. So I support that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. John Stein. And I believe Don Argula left.
John Stein, 1334 Cathy Court.
I sort of like the appearance of the Bankhead Theater. I like the mid-century modern look. And I think when you look at these pictures, none of them really fit, especially if they're permanent structures with the current vista that we see. If we put in a permanent structure, it should be compatible with the existing theater. I have no objection to umbrellas, but I mean, some of these things look like they're great for, a fair or a two-day art show, but not something that's even semi-permanent. I would also suggest that before you go out for bid, somebody do an analysis of where the sun is at various times of the year. I mean, the sun is in a totally different place in May and June than it will be in September and October. And so you've got to figure out where you want the shade structure. Also, while it'll make it cooler in the summer, it will also make it cooler in the fall. And sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of sun when your air temperature is down in the 50s. What I'd like to suggest also is that you may want to have an arborist look. I mean, there's a lot of stuff buried under the pavement, but you may want to look at the seasonal self-erecting shade structures, or as some people call them, trees. There are some trees like ginkgos that grow 40 feet high that are columnar. You have to look at lines of sight and where you could possibly put them, but that might offer a significant improvement not only in shade but also in cooling. A half a dozen or a dozen large trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Okay, that closes out the comment period. When I got the staff report on this, I was kind of surprised because I was thinking of something much simpler, not quite so grandiose, not something that was that expensive, and as Mr. Stein pointed out, not something that was quite so permanent, but something that would be able to provide shade for the audience as well as for the performers. So there was some concern about wooden instruments out in the hot sun. So I was looking for something simpler. I think that when it was presented last time around to have this come back, that was my sense, was to keep it simpler, less expensive, not so grandiose, but and whether or not we needed to actually bring in a landscape architect, or whether we can just see what's already out there. I don't know if we need to go through a 6-month RFP process. What's the sense of the council? What do you, Vice Mayor?
Okay, yeah, can I ask a few questions? So we're, and this leads to what you're saying. So we're proposing a new CIP project. Is this a unfunded or a funded CIP project?
As your staff report notes, there is not current funding in your CIP program for this particular object.
Okay.
And based on your direction, we would either propose to add that to your current CIP or your CIP that you are going to consider essentially during your workshops and adoption in May and June of this year.
And maintaining that unfunded status, correct?
Ultimately, the objective of having the project would be to fund it, but that's what we're looking for direction from you all on this. So part of this is staff is, I think, a little bit unclear about the parameters of the project. In other words, the thing we're trying to accomplish. If I am trying to keep 4 performers shaded, I can go to Costco. They have a product, we can bring it back, we can have it up tomorrow. If the answer is you'd like, 5,000 square feet of audience area to have some amount of shade in it, that's a very different scale of project. And maybe the answer is that you all don't have a clear vision of what that is. And so that is why you sort of saw staff saying, I'd love to get as much clarity from you all as to whether you wish us to pursue this at all, and then some, at least, consideration, maybe bracketing of what those options you'd like us to go out into the marketplace and get some feedback on. But as you can see from just the pictures, shade structures can be from extremely simple and relatively modest in size to much bigger and much more permanent. We're not certain and that's what we'd sort of love to hear from you tonight is what problem are you trying to have us solve?
And that's, I want to be aware of any visual impact, no matter what the cost on the plaza. And so that's why I think that number would be good to start with. I also want to point out that I think it was mentioned in the past that there may be some interest in fundraising from the community. So I don't want it to appear like we're just going to fund $500,000 straight up without some type of input from the community. And that leads back to then the RFQ process to make sure that we include and we analyze all the options. So looking at page 528 of our packet, there are 6 bullet points. It looks like it outlines the RFQ process. What would be so that would be the 6-month process that you're describing, correct? Those 6 bullet points, roughly?
Yes.
Okay, and then what's the cost just to engage in that process? Is that mainly a staff time allocation? There's really not.
Yes.
So
That's just staff time spent.
that's just staff. Well, that's just staff time. Okay, what I love. Yeah.
Your cost is an opportunity cost. If you had us wanting to do other things during that same period of time in the downtown, that might have an impact. But there's not a cash outlay.
Okay. So I'm comfortable with engaging in the RFQ process for this, outlining the 6 bullet points. Having an unfunded CIP, I think, is okay at this point. I don't necessarily know that we need to authorize that tonight. I think that really the route that I would prefer is that we authorize to go forward with the RFQ, outlining the process, and then depending on what happens either during, if we feel like we have some momentum and there's a great project that we can agree upon, then maybe look at the CIP end of it, including that in the CIP. But at this point, I would just say let's go out with the RFQ. Let's look at all options, keep it at that funding level, but not necessarily put it into the CIP until we have some traction.
I think that's okay, but I guess I'm sort of with John. I was a little surprised how long it was going to take. So with this process, we don't get any relief this summer, for example.
The length of time depends in part on how many steps the council wants to review. So if you want to direct staff to go out and prepare an RFP and do a lot of this at staff level, we can certainly speed up the process. If the council wants to review the RFP and then review the submittals and then review the proposals, it will take much longer. So there are various options in terms of how involved you want to be and how quickly you want to go.
Yeah, I don't even know what I'd want to put in the RFP. What are we going to ask?
We are looking for direction tonight, but certainly we'd be asking for qualified consultants to provide options to the community on shading devices.
At various cost levels?
Right.
Yeah. But a fundamental question I think that would be very helpful when we put this information out is the scale of the thing we are trying to shade.
Right.
And what I think I've heard some people talk around is a combination of shading the performing area and at least a portion of the audience area as well. If that's not the case, or you'd like to clarify that, or you'd like a couple of options, that would be wonderful. The more clarity we can put in the front end of this, I think the more helpful the responses will be back.
Right.
And also, something that is not permanent, something that, for example, would go up in the summertime and then come down in the autumn and fall, because as Mr. Stein pointed out, sometimes you like to have a little bit of sun in those autumn days. So something that can go up without a great deal of trouble, something that then can come back down and isn't beaten up in the wintertime.
The sun felt good yesterday.
Something everybody would like, okay?
And I'd love a motion or some sort of thing.
We haven't gone through the whole process
Can I comment
yet.
on that, though? Just briefly. Then you think if you could take something up and put something down, what does that do to the operational costs? Where's the storage of the items? So I don't know if that's necessarily as straightforward of a question, where if you look at something that might be permanent or permanent/convertible with very little, see, I think that's when you start getting into the $400,000 or $500,000 range, where it's a it's a turn of a switch and something rotates versus sending staff out to disconnect things and then depending on the scale. See,
Well,
there's still too many questions.
It's like hanging Christmas lights.
Yeah, and some people hire somebody to hang Christmas lights for them because they don't want to fall off the roof, or
you leave them up all year round.
Or I grew up next door to somebody who left them up all year round, so that was fine. But so I think there's a lot of questions here.
So can I frankly, I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds big time. I think the point is that several people over the years have noted that shade would be helpful. Okay, and the thing originated with the idea of maybe we should shade the performers, and it was a fairly elaborate structure and more costly than what we're talking about. And then in conversations that evolved to, well, it would be nice to have the audience shaded as well. So, and then it came to, well, those kinds of things that we're seeing there are relatively inexpensive, less so than the original structure for shading the performers. But the point here is not tonight to design this thing and answer every single question. And I know we're all kind of engineers and we like that stuff, right? But I don't suggest that for tonight, because we can easily go there and never be done. So I think the point is that there is an express need potentially for the shade structure, and that what we should do is authorize staff to explore the options, come back with a top budget envelope, somewhere in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, and that we're trying to get something that's aesthetically pleasing. We don't know the answer, and I don't think we can engineer it tonight as to whether it's permanent or not. And I think there are advantages to both, and I think we need to have this considered and some analysis done. I also think that in the wintertime, that if there's a structure there, it could be used for lights as well. So let's think about this, but let's get started. And so I would really hate to see that we're so much into the weeds and we see all the problems and we go, oh no, we can't do it. I would say that what we should do is launch the study to see if this makes sense within these general parameters of shielding both the performers and the audience, and within this budget envelope, and with the aesthetic considerations of everything. I mean, that's all we need to do. Let's just get started, I think. All right, so I move what I just said.
Yeah, I just want to get a comment in here, too. It's more a suggestion. LARPD may already have this going on. At least a year ago, we put it on a CIP project to do the Bothwell Park and have some shade structures. In addition to many of our parks which are shaded by those which Mr. Stein suggests, the growing ones, those work really well. But Bothwell has nothing in their playground, and so shade, that was big on their list, and I believe they're probably at least 6 to 9 months ahead of where we are right here.
So I move that we authorize staff to explore the options, come back with a report of what we can do with shade within a $450 plus or minus budget, and that it considers the aesthetics as well as the practicality of it.
And check in with what LARPD's already done.
And essentially using a process as outlined in the staff report, roughly?
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So, I guess,
so I'd second it, but...
So one question for clarification. As we mentioned earlier, the process that we've outlined takes some time because we come back to the council to review the RFP, we come back to select the consultant. Do you want to go through that process, or do you want to go a little quicker?
Well, let me just say, I'd rather do this right and practically rather than jam it, because we've been gone for years without this. But the idea is this is something that we've been talking about for years, so let's just do it right. That'd be my preference.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. But one question on the motion was plus or minus 450, not 550.
No, yeah, I think 450 plus or minus in that range. Let's just start. Let's just
sure. Okay, just to clarify.
Is
So second still
Options.
stands.
Come back with options. Okay. Any other discussion on the motion? Moved and seconded. Is there sufficient direction for staff?
Yes.
Okay. Everybody kind of looked like,
I think you guys said we'll talk about it later. And then say yes.
we'll come back.
It's
All right.
11 o'clock, donut wheel time.
Yeah, okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Okay. It's 11 o'clock, so, pardon me? You want to
Do the other
report
stuff
out?
next time, or do you want to do the report out?
Okay, what's the pleasure of the council? You want to do report out, or you want to call it?
I've been at the report. I'm good, Jim.
Okay, pardon me?
I'm done.
You're done? Okay, so, did that point of motion to adjourn?
Okay, I'll move we adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, so in that case, we will report out next time. Pardon me?
I said okay.
Okay, so report next time. So tonight, I would like to adjourn in memory of Daniel Swinbank. He served the community for many, many years on the Human Services Commission, the Library Board of Trustees, the Social Concerns Committee. So again, recognizing in honor and in memory of Daniel Swinbank, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you.